Section 25 of the Forsyte Saga, Volume 3, To Let, by John Galsworthy. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Peter Dann. Old Jolyon walks. Twofold impulse had made Jolyon say to his wife at breakfast, "Let's go up to Lord's." Wanted. Something to abate the anxiety in which those two had lived during the 60 hours since John had brought Fleur down. Wanted, too, that which might assuage the pangs of memory in one who knew he might lose them any day. 58 years ago Jolyon had become an Eton boy, for old Jolyon's whim had been that he should be canonized at the greatest possible expense. Year after year he had gone to Lord's from Stanhope Gate with a father whose youth in the 1820s had been passed without polish in the game of cricket. Old Jolyon would speak quite openly of swipes, full tosses, half and three-quarter balls, and young Jolyon, with the guileless snobbery of youth, had trembled lest his sire should be overheard. Only in this supreme matter of cricket he had been nervous, for his father, in Crimean whiskers then, had ever impressed him as the beau ideal. Though never canonized himself, old Jolyon's natural fastidiousness and balance had saved him from the errors of the vulgar. How delicious, after bowling in a top hat and a sweltering heat, to go home with his father in a hansom cab, bathe, dress, and forth to the Disunion Club, to dine off whitebait, cutlets, and a tart, and go, two swells, old and young, in lavender kid gloves, to the opera or play. And on Sunday, when the match was over, and his top hat duly broken, down with his father in a special hansom to the Crown and Sceptre and the terrace above the river, the golden 60s when the world was simple, dandies glamorous, democracy not born, and the books of White Melville coming thick and fast. A generation later, with his own boy, Jolly, Harrow buttonholed with cornflowers, by old Jolyon's whim his grandson had been canonized at a trifle less expense. Again Jolyon had experienced the heat and counter-passions of the day, and come back to the cool and the strawberry beds of Robin Hill, and billiards after dinner, his boy making the most heartbreaking flukes and trying to seem languid and grown up. Those 2 days each year he and his son had been alone together in the world, one on each side, and democracy just born. And so he had unearthed a grey top hat, borrowed a tiny bit of light blue ribbon from Irene, and gingerly, keeping cool by car and train and taxi, had reached Lord's ground. There, beside her in a lawn-coloured frock with narrow black edges, he had watched the game and felt the old thrill stir within him. When Soames passed, the day was spoiled. Irene's face was distorted by compression of the lips. No good to go on sitting here with Soames, or perhaps his daughter, recurring in front of them like decimals. And he said, "Well, dear, if you've had enough, let's go." That evening Jolyon felt exhausted. Not wanting her to see him thus, he waited till she had begun to play, and stole off to the little study. He opened the long window for air, and the door that he might still hear her music drifting in, and settled in his father's old armchair, closed his eyes with his head against the worn brown leather. Like that passage of the César Franck sonata, so had been his life with her, a divine third movement. And now this business of John's, this bad business. Drifted to the edge of consciousness, he hardly knew if it were in sleep that he smelled the scent of a cigar, and seemed to see his father in the blackness before his closed eyes. That shape formed, went, and formed again, as if in the very chair where he himself was sitting he saw his father, black-coated, with knees crossed, glasses balanced between thumb and finger, saw the big white moustaches and the deep eyes looking up below a dome of forehead and seeming to search his own, seeming to speak. "Are you facing it, Joe? It's for you to decide. She's only a woman." Ah, how well he knew his father in that phrase, how all the Victorian age came up with it. And his answer, "No, I've funked it, funked hurting her, and John, and myself. I've got a heart. I've funked it." But the old eyes, so much older, so much younger than his own, kept at it. "It's your wife, your son, your past. Tackle it, my boy." Was it a message from walking spirit, or but the instinct of his sire living on within him? And again came that scent of cigar smoke from the old saturated leather. Well, he would tackle it, write to John, and put the whole thing down in black and white. And suddenly he breathed with difficulty, with a sense of suffocation, as if his heart was swollen. He got up and went out into the air. The stars were very bright. He passed along the terrace round the corner of the house, till, through the window of the music-room, he could see Irene at the piano, with lamplight falling on her powdery hair. Withdrawn into herself she seemed, her dark eyes staring straight before her, her hands idle. Jolyon saw her raise those hands and clasp them over her breast. "It's John with her," he thought. "Old John. I'm dying out of her. It's natural." And careful not to be seen, he stole back. Next day, after a bad night, he sat down to his task. He wrote with difficulty and many erasures. "My dearest boy, you are old enough to understand how very difficult it is for elders to give themselves away to their young, especially when, like your mother and myself, though I shall never think of her as anything but young, their hearts are altogether set on him to whom they must confess. I cannot say we are conscious of having sinned exactly. People in real life very seldom are, I believe, but most persons would say we had, and at all events our conduct, righteous or not, has found us out. The truth is, my dear, we both have pasts which it is now my task to make known to you, because they so grievously and deeply affect your future. Many, very many years ago, as far back indeed as 1883, when she was only 20, your mother had the great and lasting misfortune to make an unhappy marriage. No, not with me, John. Without money of her own, and with only a stepmother, closely related to Jezebel, she was very unhappy in her home life. It was Fleur's father that she married, my cousin, Soames Forsyte. He had pursued her very tenaciously, and to do him justice, was deeply in love with her. Within a week she knew the fearful mistake she had made. It was not his fault, it was her error of judgment, her misfortune. So far Jolyon had kept some semblance of irony, but now his subject carried him away. "John, I want to explain to you, if I can, and it's very hard, how it is that an unhappy marriage such as this can so easily come about. You will, of course, say, if she didn't really love him, how could she ever have married him? You would be right, if it not for one or two rather terrible considerations. From this initial mistake of hers, all the subsequent trouble, sorrow, and tragedy have come, and so I must make it clear to you if I can. You see, John, in those days, and even to this day, indeed, I don't see, for all the talk of enlightenment, how it can well be otherwise, most girls are married ignorant of the sexual side of life. Even if they know what it means, they have not experienced it. That's the crux. It is this actual lack of experience, whatever verbal knowledge they have, which makes all the difference and all the trouble. In a vast number of marriages, and your mother's was one, girls are not and cannot be certain whether they love the man they marry or not. They do not know until after that act of union which makes the reality of marriage. Now, in many, perhaps in most doubtful cases, this act cements and strengthens the attachment, but in other cases, and your mother's was one, it is a revelation of mistake, a destruction of such attraction as there was. There is nothing more tragic in a woman's life than such a revelation, growing daily, nightly clearer. Coarse-grained and unthinking people are apt to laugh at such a mistake and say, "What a fuss about nothing." Narrow and self-righteous people, only capable of judging the lives of others by their own, are apt to condemn those who make this tragic error, to condemn them for life to the dungeons they have made for themselves. You know the expression, She has made her bed, she must lie on it. It is a hard-mouthed saying, quite unworthy of a gentleman or lady in the best sense of those words, and I can use no stronger condemnation. I have not been what is called a moral man, but I wish to use no words to you, my dear, which will make you think lightly of ties or contracts into which you enter. Heaven forbid. But with the experience of a life behind me, I do say that those who condemn the victims of these tragic mistakes, condemn them and hold out no hands to help them, are inhuman, or rather they would be if they had the understanding to know what they are doing. But they haven't. Let them go. They are as much anathema to me as I, no doubt, am to them. I have had to say all this because I am going to put you into a position to judge your mother, and you are very young without experience of what life is. To go on with the story. After 3 years of effort to subdue her shrinking, I was going to say her loathing, and it's not too strong a word, for shrinking soon becomes loathing under such circumstances. 3 years of what to a sensitive, beauty-loving nature like your mother's, John's, was torment. She met a young man who fell in love with her. He was the architect of this very house that we live in now. He was building it for her and Fleur's father to live in, a new prison to hold her in place of the one she inhabited with him in London. Perhaps that fact played some part in what came of it. But in any case, she, too, fell in love with him. I know it's not necessary to explain to you that one does not precisely choose with whom one will fall in love. It comes. Very well. It came. I can imagine, though she never said much to me about it, the struggle that then took place in her, because, John, she was brought up strictly and was not light in her ideas, not at all. However, this was an overwhelming feeling, and it came to pass that they loved in deed as well as in thought. Then came a fearful tragedy. I must tell you of it, because if I don't, you will never understand the real situation that you have now to face. The man whom she had married, Soames Forsyte, the father of Fleur, one night, at the height of her passion for this young man, forcibly reasserted his rights over her. The next day she met her lover and told him of it. Whether he committed suicide or whether he was accidentally run over in his distraction, we never knew, but so it was. Think of your mother as she was that evening when she heard of his death. I happened to see her. Your grandfather sent me to help her if I could. I only just saw her before the door was shut against me by her husband. But I have never forgotten her face. I can see it now. I was not in love with her then, not for 12 years after, but I have never forgotten. My dear boy, it is not easy to write like this, but you see, I must. Your mother is wrapped up in you, utterly, devotedly. I don't wish to write harshly of Soames Forsyte. I don't think harshly of him. I have long been sorry for him. Perhaps I was sorry even then. As the world judges, she was in error, he within his rights. He loved her, in his way. She was his property. That is the view he holds of life, of human feelings and hearts. Property. It's not his fault. So was he born. To me it is a view that has always been abhorrent. So was I born. Knowing you as I do, I feel it cannot be otherwise than abhorrent to you. Let me go on with the story. Your mother fled from his house that night. For 12 years she lived quietly alone without companionship of any sort, until in 1899 her husband, you see he was still her husband, for he did not attempt to divorce her, and she, of course, had no right to divorce him, became conscious, it seems, of the want of children, and commenced a long attempt to induce her to go back to him and give him a child. I was her trustee then, under your grandfather's will, and I watched this going on. While watching, I became attached to her, devotedly attached. His pressure increased, till one day she came to me here and practically put herself under my protection. Her husband, who was kept informed of all her movements, attempted to force us apart by bringing a divorce suit, or possibly he really meant it, I don't know. But anyway, our names were publicly joined. That decided us, and we became united in fact. She was divorced, married me, and you were born. We have lived in perfect happiness, at least I have, and I believe your mother also. Soames, soon after the divorce, married Fleur's mother, and she was born. That is the story, John. I have told it you because by the affection which we see you have formed for this man's daughter, you are blindly moving towards what must utterly destroy your mother's happiness, if not your own. I don't wish to speak of myself, because at my age there's no use supposing I shall cumber the ground much longer. Besides, what I should suffer would be mainly on her account and on yours. But what I want you to realize is that feelings of horror and aversion such as those can never be buried or forgotten. They are alive in her today. Only yesterday at Lord's we happened to see Soames Forsyte. Her face, if you had seen it, would have convinced you. The idea that you should marry his daughter is a nightmare to her, John. I have nothing to say against Fleur, save that she is his daughter. But your children, if you married her, would be the grandchildren of Soames, as much as of your mother, of a man who once owned your mother as a man might own a slave. Think what that would mean. By such a marriage you enter the camp which held your mother prisoner, and wherein she ate her heart out. You are just on the threshold of life. You have only known this girl 2 months, and however deeply you think you love her, I appeal to you to break it off at once. Don't give your mother this rankling pain and humiliation during the rest of her life. Young though she will always seem to me, she is 57. Except for us two, she has no one in the world. She will soon have only you. Pluck up your spirit, John, and break away. Don't put this cloud and barrier between you. Don't break her heart. Bless you, my dear boy, and again forgive me for all the pain this letter must bring you. We tried to spare it you, but Spain, it seems, was no good. Ever your devoted father, Jolyon Forsyte. Having finished his confession, Jolyon sat with a thin cheek on his hand, rereading. There were things in it which hurt him so much when he thought of John reading them that he nearly tore the letter up. To speak of such things at all to a boy, his own boy, to speak of them in relation to his own wife and the boy's own mother, seemed dreadful to the reticence of his Forsyte soul. And yet, without speaking of them, how make John understand the reality, the deep cleavage, the ineffaceable scar? Without them, how justify this stiffing of the boy's love? He might just as well not write at all. He folded the confession and put it in his pocket. It was, thank heaven, Saturday. He had still Sunday evening to think it over, for even if posted now it could not reach John till Monday. He felt a curious relief at this delay, and at the fact that, whether sent or not, it was written. In the rose garden, which had taken the place of the old fernery, he could see Irene snipping and pruning with a little basket on her arm. She was never idle, it seemed to him, and he envied her now that he himself was idle nearly all his time. He went down to her. She held up a stained glove and smiled. A piece of lace tied under her chin concealed her hair, and her oval face with its still dark brows looked very young. "The green fly are awful this year, and yet it's cold. You look tired, Jolyon." Jolyon took the confession from his pocket. "I've been writing this. I think you ought to see it." To John. Her whole face had changed in that instant, becoming almost haggard. "Yes, the murder's out." He gave it to her and walked away among the roses. Presently, seeing that she had finished reading and was standing quite still with the sheets of the letter against her skirt, he came back to her. "Well, it's wonderfully put. I don't see how it could be put better. Thank you, dear. Is there anything you would like left out?" She shook her head. "No, he must know all if he's to understand." "That's what I thought, but I hate it." He had the feeling that he hated it more than she. To him, sex was so much easier to mention between man and woman than between man and man, and she had always been more natural and frank, not deeply secretive like his Forsyte self. "I wonder if he will understand even now, Jolyon. He's so young, and he shrinks from the physical." "He gets that shrinking from my father. He was as fastidious as a girl in all such matters. Would it be better to rewrite the whole thing and just say you hated Soames? Irene shook her head. Hate's only a word. It conveys nothing. No, better as it is. Very well, I shall go tomorrow. She raised her face to his, and in sight of the big house's many creeped windows, he kissed her. End of section 25. Section 26 of the Forsyte Saga, Volume 3, To Let, by John Galsworthy. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Peter Dann. Confession. Late that same afternoon, Jolyon had a nap in the old armchair. Face down on his knee was La Rotisserie de la Refine Paddock, and just before he fell asleep he had been thinking, as a people, shall we ever really like the French? Will they ever really like us? He himself had always liked the French, feeling at home with their wit, their taste, their cooking. Irene and he had paid many visits to France before the war, when John had been at his private school. His romance with her had begun in Paris, his last and most enduring romance. But the French, no Englishman could like them who could not see them in some sort with a detached aesthetic eye, and with that melancholy conclusion he had nodded off. When he woke, he saw John standing between him and the window. The boy had evidently come in from the garden and was waiting for him to wake. Jolyon smiled, still half asleep. How nice the chap looked, sensitive, affectionate, straight. Then his heart gave a nasty jump, and a quaking sensation overcame him. John, that confession. He controlled himself with an effort. Why, John, where did you spring from? John bent over and kissed his forehead. Only then he noticed the look on the boy's face. I came home to tell you something, Dad. With all his might, Jolyon tried to get the better of the jumping, gurgling sensation within his chest. Well, sit down, old man. Have you seen your mother? No. The boy's flushed look gave place to pallor. He sat down on the arm of the old chair, as in the old days Jolyon himself used to sit beside his own father, installed in its recesses. Right up to the time of the rupture in their relations he had been wont to perch there. Had he now reached such a moment with his own son? All his life he had hated scenes like poison, avoided rows, gone on his own way quietly, and let others go on theirs. But now, it seemed, at the very end of things, he had a scene before him, more painful than any he had avoided. He drew a visor down over his emotion, and waited for his son to speak. Father, said John slowly, Fleur and I are engaged. Exactly, thought Jolyon, breathing with difficulty. I know that you and Mother don't like the idea. Fleur says that Mother was engaged to her father before you married her. Of course, I don't know what happened, but it must be ages ago. I'm devoted to her, Dad, and she says she is to me. Jolyon uttered a queer sound, half laugh, half groan. You are 19, John, and I am 72. How are we to understand each other in a matter like this, eh? You love Mother, Dad? You must know what we feel. It isn't fair to let old things spoil our happiness, is it? Brought face to face with his confession, Jolyon resolved to do without it, if by any means he could. He laid his hand on the boy's arm. Look, John, I might put you off with talk about your both being too young and not knowing your own minds and all that, but you wouldn't listen. Besides, it doesn't meet the case. Youth, unfortunately, cures itself. You talk lightly about old things like that, knowing nothing, as you say truly, of what happened. Now, have I ever given you reason to doubt my love for you, or my word? At a less anxious moment he might have been amused by the conflict his words aroused, the boy's eager clasp to reassure him on these points, the dread on his face of what that reassurance would bring forth, but he could only feel grateful for the squeeze. Very well, you can believe what I tell you. If you don't give up this love affair, you will make Mother wretched to the end of her days. Believe me, my dear, the past, whatever it was, can't be buried. It can't indeed." John got off the arm of the chair. The girl, thought Jolyon. There she goes, starting up before him, life itself, eager, pretty, loving. "I can't, Father. How can I? Just because you say that. Of course I can't." "John, if you knew the story, you would give this up without hesitation. You would have to. Can't you believe me?" "How can you tell me what I should think? Father, I love her better than anything in the world." Jolyon's face twitched, and he said with painful slowness, "Better than your mother, John?" From the boy's face and his clenched fists, Jolyon realized the stress and struggle he was going through. "I don't know," he burst out. "I don't know. But to give Fleur up for nothing, for something I don't understand, for something that I don't believe can really matter half so much, will make you feel us unjust, put a barrier, yes. But that's better than going on with this." "I can't. Fleur loves me, and I love her. You want me to trust you. Why don't you trust me, Father? We wouldn't want to know anything. We wouldn't let it make any difference. It'll only make us both love you and Mother all the more." Jolyon put his hand into his breast pocket, but brought it out again empty, and sat clucking his tongue against his teeth. "Think what your mother's been to you, John. She has nothing but you. I shan't last much longer." "Why not? It isn't fair to—" "Why not?" "Well," said Jolyon, rather coldly, "because the doctors tell me I shan't, that's all." "Oh, Dad!" cried John, and burst into tears. This downbreak of his son, whom he had not seen cry since he was 10, moved Jolyon terribly. He recognized to the full how fearfully soft the boy's heart was, how much he would suffer in this business, and in life generally. And he reached out his hand helplessly, not wishing, indeed not daring, to get up. "Dear man," he said, "don't, or you'll make me." John smoothed down his paroxysm and stood with face averted, very still. What now, thought Jolyon, what can I say to move him? "By the way, don't speak of that to Mother," he said. "She has enough to frighten her with this affair of yours. I know how you feel. But, John, you know her and me well enough to be sure we wouldn't wish to spoil your happiness lightly. Why, my dear boy, we don't care for anything but your happiness, at least with me. It's just yours and Mother's, and with her, just yours. It's all the future for you both that's at stake." John turned. His face was deadly pale. His eyes, deep in his head, seemed to burn. "What is it? What is it? Don't keep me like this." Jolyon, who knew that he was beaten, thrust his hand again into his breast pocket, and sat for a full minute, breathing with difficulty, his eyes closed. The thought passed through his mind, "I've had a good long innings, some pretty bitter moments. This is the worst." Then he brought his hand out with the letter, and said with a sort of fatigue, "Well, John, if you hadn't come today, I was going to send you this. I wanted to spare you. I wanted to spare your mother and myself, but I see it's no good. Read it, and I think I'll go into the garden." He reached forward to get up. John, who had taken the letter, said quickly, "No, I'll go," and was gone. Jolyon sank back into his chair. A bluebottle chose that moment to come buzzing round him with a sort of fury. The sound was homely, better than nothing. Where had the boy gone to read his letter? The wretched letter, the wretched story. A cruel business, cruel to her, to Soames, to those two children, to himself. His heart thumped and pained him. Life, its loves, its work, its beauty, its aching, and its end. A good time, a fine time in spite of all, until you regretted that you had ever been born. Life that wore you down, yet did not make you want to die. That was the cunning evil. Mistake to have a heart. Again the bluebottle came buzzing, bringing in all the heat and hum and scent of summer. Yes, even the scent as of ripe fruits, dried grasses, sappy shrubs, and the vanilla breath of cows. And out there, somewhere in the fragrance, John would be reading that letter, turning and twisting its pages in his trouble, his bewilderment and trouble, breaking his heart about it. The thought made Jolyon acutely miserable. John was such a tender-hearted chap, affectionate to his bones, and conscientious too. It was so unfair, so damned unfair. He remembered Irene saying to him once, "Never was anyone born more loving and lovable than John." Poor little John. His world gone up the spout all of a summer afternoon. Youth took things so hard. And stirred, tormented by that vision of youth taking things hard, Jolyon got out of his chair and went to the window. The boy was nowhere visible, and he passed out. If one could take any help to him now, one must. He traversed the shrubbery, glanced into the walled garden. No John, nor where the peaches and the apricots were beginning to swell and colour. He passed the cupressus trees, dark and spiral, into the meadow. Where had the boy got to? Had he rushed down to the coppice, his old hunting ground? Jolyon crossed the rows of hay. They would cock it on Monday, and be carrying the day after if rain held off. Often they had crossed this field together, hand in hand, when John was a little chap. Dash it! The golden age was over by the time one was 10. He came to the pond where flies and gnats were dancing over a bright reedy surface, and on into the coppice. It was cool there, fragrant of larches. Still no John. He called. No answer. On the log seat he sat down, nervous, anxious, forgetting his own physical sensations. He had been wrong to let the boy get away with that letter. He ought to have kept him under his eye from the start. Greatly troubled, he got up to retrace his steps. At the farm buildings he called again and looked into the dark cow-house. There, in the cool and the scent of vanilla and ammonia, away from flies, the 3 Alderneys were chewing the quiet cud, just milked, waiting for evening, to be turned out again into the lower field. One turned a lazy head, a lustrous eye. Jolyon could see the slobber on its grey lower lip. He saw everything with passionate clearness in the agitation of his nerves, all that in his time he had adored and tried to paint, wonder of light and shade and colour. No wonder the legend put Christ into a manger. What more devotional than the eyes and moon-white horns of a chewing cow in the warm dusk? He called again. No answer. And he hurried away out of the coppice, past the pond, up the hill. Oddly ironical, now he came to think of it, if John had taken the gruel of his discovery down in the coppice where his mother and Bosany in those old days had made the plunge of acknowledging their love. Where he himself, on the log seat the Sunday morning he came back from Paris, had realized to the full that Irene had become the world to him. That would have been the place for irony to tear the veil from before the eyes of Irene's boy. But he was not here. Where had he got to? One must find the poor chap. A gleam of sun had come, sharpening to his hurrying senses all the beauty of the afternoon, of the tall trees and lengthening shadows, of the blue and the white clouds, the scent of the hay and the cooing of the pigeons and the flower shapes standing tall. He came to the rosary, and the beauty of the roses in that sudden sunlight seemed to him unearthly. "Rose, you Spaniard!" Wonderful 3 words. There she had stood by that bush of dark red roses, had stood to read and decide that John must know it all. He knew all now. Had she chosen wrong? He bent and sniffed a rose. Its petals brushed his nose and trembling lips. Nothing so soft as a rose-leaf's velvet, except her neck, Irene. On across the lawn he went, up the slope to the oak tree. Its top alone was glistening, for the sudden sun was away over the house. The lower shade was thick, blessedly cool. He was greatly overheated. He paused a minute with his hand on the rope of the swing. Jolly, Holly, John. The old swing. and suddenly he felt horribly, deadly ill. "I've overdone it," he thought. "By Jove, I've overdone it, after all." He staggered up toward the terrace, dragged himself up the steps, and fell against the wall of the house. He leaned there gasping, his face buried in the honeysuckle that he and she had taken such trouble with that it might sweeten the air which drifted in. Its fragrance mingled with awful pain. "My love," he thought, "the boy." And with a great effort he tottered in through the long window and sank into old Jolyon's chair. The book was there, a pencil in it. He caught it up, scribbled a word on the open page. His hand dropped. So it was like this, was it? There was a great wrench and darkness. End of section 26. Section 27 of the Forsyte Saga, Volume 3, To Let, by John Galsworthy. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Peter Dann. Irene. When John rushed away with the letter in his hand, he ran along the terrace and round the corner of the house in fear and confusion. Leaning against the creepered wall, he tore open the letter. It was long, very long. This added to his fear, and he began reading. When he came to the words, "It was Fleur's father that she married," everything seemed to spin before him. He was close to a window, and entering by it, he passed through music-room and hall up to his bedroom. Dipping his face in cold water, he sat on his bed and went on reading, dropping each finished page on the bed beside him. His father's writing was easy to read. He knew it so well, though he had never had a letter from him 1/4 so long. He read with a dull feeling, imagination only half at work. He best grasped on that first reading the pain his father must have had in writing such a letter. He let the last sheet fall, and in a sort of mental, moral helplessness began to read the first again. It all seemed to him disgusting, dead and disgusting. Then suddenly a hot wave of horrified emotion tingled through him. He buried his face in his hands. His mother, Fleur's father. He took up the letter again and read on mechanically. And again came the feeling that it was all dead and disgusting, his own love so different. This letter said his mother and her father. An awful letter. Property. Could there be men who looked on women as their property? Faces seen in streets and countryside came thronging up before him, red stockfish faces, hard dull faces, prim dry faces, violent faces, hundreds, thousands of them. How could he know what men who had such faces thought and did? He held his head in his hands and groaned. His mother. He caught up the letter and read on again. Horror and aversion alive in her today. Your children, grandchildren, of a man who once owned your mother as a man might own a slave. He got up from his bed. This cruel, shadowy past, lurking there to murder his love and Fleur's, was true, or his father could never have written it. Why didn't they tell me the first thing, he thought. The day I first saw Fleur, they knew I'd seen her. They were afraid. And now I've got it. Overcome by misery too acute for thought or reason, he crept into a dusky corner of the room and sat down on the floor. He sat there like some unhappy little animal. There was comfort in dusk and the floor, as if he were back in those days when he played his battles, sprawling all over it. He sat there huddled, his hair ruffled, his hands clasped round his knees. For how long he did not know. He was wrenched from his blank wretchedness by the sound of the door opening from his mother's room. The blinds were down over the windows of his room, shut up in his absence, and from where he sat he could only hear a rustle, her footsteps crossing, till beyond the bed he saw her standing before his dressing-table. She had something in her hand. He hardly breathed, hoping she would not see him and go away. He saw her touch things on the table as if they had some virtue in them, then face the window, grey from head to foot, like a ghost. The least turn of her head and she must see him. Her lips moved. "Oh, John." She was speaking to herself. The tone of her voice troubled John's heart. He saw in her hand a little photograph. She held it towards the light, looking at it, very small. He knew it, one of himself as a tiny boy which she always kept in her bag. His heart beat fast, and suddenly, as if she had heard it, she turned her eyes and saw him. At the gasp she gave, and the movement of her hands, pressing the photograph against her breast, she said, "Yes, it's me." She moved over to the bed and sat down on it, quite close to him, her hand still clasping her breast, her feet among the sheets of the letter which had slipped to the floor. She saw them, and her hands grasped the edge of the bed. She sat very upright, her dark eyes fixed on him. At last she spoke. "Well, John, you know, I see." "Yes." "You've seen father?" "Yes." There was a long silence till she said, "Oh, my darling." "It's all right." The emotions in him were so violent and so mixed that he dared not move. Resentment, despair, and yet a strange yearning for the comfort of her hand on his forehead. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know." There was another long silence. Then she got up. She stood a moment, very still, made a little movement with her hand, and said, "My darling boy, my most darling boy, don't think of me. Think of yourself." And passing round the foot of the bed, went back into her room. John turned, curled into a sort of ball, as might a hedgehog, into the corner made by the two walls. He must have been 20 minutes there before a cry roused him. It came from the terrace below. He got up, scared. Again came the cry, "John!" His mother was calling. He ran out and down the stairs, through the empty dining room, into the study. She was kneeling before the old armchair, and his father was lying back, quite white, his head on his breast, one of his hands resting on an open book with a pencil clutched in it, more strangely still than anything he had ever seen. She looked round wildly and said, "Oh, John, he's dead! He's dead!" John flung himself down, and reaching over the arm of the chair where he had lately been sitting, put his lips to the forehead. Icy cold. How could Dad be dead when only an hour ago? His mother's arms were round the knees, pressed her breast against them. Why wasn't I with him?" he heard her whisper. Then he saw the tottering word Irene pencilled on the open page, and broke down himself. It was his first sight of human death, and its unutterable stillness blotted from him all other emotions. All else then was but preliminary to this. All love and life and joy, anxiety and sorrow, all movement, light and beauty, but a beginning to this terrible white stillness. It made a dreadful mark on him. It seemed suddenly little, futile, short. He mastered himself at last, got up and raised her. "Mother, don't cry, Mother." Some hours later, when all was done that had to be, and his mother was lying down, he saw his father alone on the bed, covered with a white sheet. He stood for a long time gazing at that face, which had never looked angry, always whimsical and kind. "To be kind and keep your end up. There's nothing else in it," he had once heard his father say. How wonderfully Dad had acted up to that philosophy. He understood now that his father had known for a long time past that this would come suddenly, known and not said a word. He gazed with an awed and passionate reverence. The loneliness of it, just to spare his mother and himself. His own trouble seemed small while he was looking at that face. The word scribbled on the page, the farewell word. Now his mother had no one but himself. He went up close to the dead face, not changed at all, and yet completely changed. He had heard his father say once that he did not believe in consciousness surviving death, or that if it did, it might be just survival till the natural age limit of the body had been reached, the natural term of its inherent vitality, so that if the body were broken by accident, excess, violent disease, consciousness might still persist till, in the course of nature, uninterfered with, it would naturally have faded out. It had struck him because he had never heard anyone else suggested. When the heart failed like this, surely it was not quite natural. Perhaps his father's consciousness was in the room with him. Above the bed hung a picture of his father's father. Perhaps his consciousness, too, was still alive, and his brother's, his half-brother, who had died in the Transvaal. Were they all gathered round this bed? John kissed the forehead and stole back to his own room. The door between it and his mother's was ajar. She had evidently been in. Everything was ready for him, even some biscuits and hot milk, and the letter no longer on the floor. He ate and drank, watching the last light fade. He did not try to see into the future, just stared at the dark branches of the oak tree level with his window, and felt as if life had stopped. Once in the night, turning in his heavy sleep, he was conscious of something white and still beside his bed, and started up. His mother's voice said, "It's only I, John dear." Her hand pressed his forehead gently back. The white figure disappeared. Alone. He fell heavily asleep again, and dreamed he saw his mother's name crawling on his bed. End of section 27. Section 28 of the Forsyte Saga, Volume 3, To Let, by John Galsworthy. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Peter Dann. Soames cogitates. The announcement in the Times of his cousin Jolyon's death affected Soames quite simply. So that chap was gone. There'd never been a time in their two lives when love had not been lost between them. That quick-blooded sentiment, hatred, had run its course long since in Soames' heart, and he had refused to allow any recrudescence, but he considered this early decease a piece of poetic justice. For 20 years the fellow had enjoyed the reversion of his wife and house, and he was dead. The obituary notice, which appeared a little later, paid Jolyon, he thought, too much attention. It spoke of that diligent and agreeable painter whose work we have come to look on as typical of the best late Victorian watercolour art. Soames, who had almost mechanically preferred Mole, Maupin, and Caswell Bay, and had always sniffed quite audibly when he came to one of his cousins on the line, turned the Times with a crackle. He had to go up to town that morning on Forsyte affairs, and was fully conscious of Gradman's glance sidelong over his spectacles. The old clerk had about him an aura of regretful congratulation. He smelled, as it were, of old days. One could almost hear him thinking, "Mr. Jolyon, yes, just my age and gone. Dear, dear. I dare say she feels it. She was a nice-looking woman. Flesh is flesh. They've given him a notice in the papers. Fancy." His atmosphere, in fact, caused Soames to handle certain leases and conversions with exceptional swiftness. "About that settlement on Miss Fleur, Mr. Soames?" "I thought better of that," answered Soames shortly. "Ah, I'm glad of that. I thought you were a little hasty. The times do change." How this death would affect Fleur had begun to trouble Soames. He was not certain that she knew of it. She seldom looked at the paper, never at the births, marriages, and deaths. He pressed matters on and made his way to Green Street for lunch. Winifred was almost doleful. Jack Cardigan had broken a splashboard so far as one could make out, and would not be fit for some time. She could not get used to the idea. "Did Profond ever get off?" he said suddenly. "He got off," replied Winifred, "but where, I don't know." Yes, there it was. Impossible to tell anything. Not that he wanted to know. Letters from Annette were coming from Dieppe, where she and her mother were staying. "You saw that fellow's death, I suppose?" "Yes," said Winifred. "I'm sorry for his children. He was very amiable." Soames uttered a rather queer sound. A suspicion of the old deep truth, that men were judged in this world rather by what they were than what they did, crept and knocked resentfully at the back doors of his mind. "I know there was a superstition to that effect," he muttered. "One must do him justice now he's dead." "I should like to have done him justice before," said Soames, "but I never had the chance. Have you got a baronetage here?" "Yes, in that bottom row." Soames took out a fat red book and ran over the leaves. "Monsieur Lawrence, 9th Baronet, created 1620, E.S. of Geoffrey, 8th Baronet, and Lavinia, daughter of Sir Charles Muscombe, Baronet of Muscombe Hall, Shropshire, married 1890, Emily, daughter of Conway Chowell, Esquire of Condafort Grange, co-Oxford, one son, heir Michael Conway, born 1895, 2 daughters. Residence Lippinghall Manor, Folwell, Bucks. Clubs, Snooks, Coffee House, Aeroplane. C. Bidicott." He said. "Did you ever know a publisher?" "Uncle Timothy." "Alive, I mean." "Monty knew one at his club. He brought him here to dinner once. Monty was always thinking of writing a book, you know, about how to make money on the turf. He tried to interest that man." "Well?" "He put him onto a horse for the 2,000. We didn't see him again. He was rather smart, if I remember." "Did it win?" "No, it ran last, I think. You know, Monty really was quite clever in his way." "Was he?" said Soames. "Can you see any connection between a sucking baronet and publishing?" "People do all sorts of things nowadays," replied Winifred. "The great stunt seems not to be idle, so different from our time. To do nothing was the thing then, but I suppose it'll come again. This young Mont that I'm speaking of is very sweet on Fleur. If it would put an end to that other affair, I might encourage it." "Has he got style?" asked Winifred. "He's no beauty. Pleasant enough, with some scattered brains. There's a good deal of land, I believe. He seems genuinely attached, but I don't know." "No," murmured Winifred. "It's very difficult. I always found it best to do nothing. It is such a bore about Jack. Now we shan't get away till after Bank Holiday. Well, the people are always amusing. I shall go into the park and watch them." "If I were you," said Soames, "I should have a country cottage and be out of the way of holidays and strikes when you want." "The country bores me," answered Winifred, "and I found the railway strike quite exciting." Winifred had always been noted for sang-froid. Soames took his leave. All the way down to Reading he debated whether he should tell Fleur of that boy's father's death. It did not alter the situation, except that he would be independent now and only have his mother's opposition to encounter. He would come into a lot of money, no doubt, and perhaps the house built for Irene and himself, the house whose architect had wrought his domestic ruin. His daughter, mistress of that house. That would be poetic justice. Soames uttered a little mirthless laugh. He had designed that house to re-establish his failing union, meant it for the seat of his descendants, if he could have induced Irene to give him one. Her son and Fleur. Their children would be, in some sort, offspring of the union between himself and her. The theatricality in that thought was repulsive to his sober sense, and yet it would be the easiest and wealthiest way out of the impasse now that Jolyon was gone. The junction of two Forsyte fortunes had a kind of conservative charm, and she, Irene, would be linked to him once more. Nonsense, absurd. He put the notion from his head. On arriving home he heard the click of billiard balls, and through the window saw young Mont sprawling over the table. Fleur, with her cue akimbo, was watching with a smile. How pretty she looked. No wonder that young fellow was out of his mind about her. A title, land. There was little enough in land these days, perhaps less in a title. The old Forsytes had always had a kind of contempt for titles, rather remote and artificial things, not worth the money they cost, and having to do with the court. They had all had that feeling in differing measure. Soames remembered Swithin, indeed, in his most expansive days, had once attended a levee. He had come away saying he shouldn't go again, all that small fry. It was suspected that he had looked too big in knee breeches. Soames remembered how his own mother had wished to be presented because of the fashionable nature of the performance, and how his father had put his foot down with unwonted decision. What did she want with that peacocking, wasting time and money? There was nothing in it. The instinct which had made and kept the English Commons the chief power in the state, a feeling that their own world was good enough and a little better than any other because it was their world, had kept the old Forsyte singularly free of flummery, as Nicholas had been wont to call it when he had the gout. Soames's generation, more self-conscious and ironical, had been saved by a sense of swithin in knee-breeches, while the third and the fourth generation, as it seemed to him, laughed at everything. However, there was no harm in the young fellow's being heir to a title and estate, a thing one couldn't help. He entered quietly as Mont missed his shot. He noted the young man's eyes fixed on Fleur, bending over in her turn, and the adoration in them almost touched him. She paused with the cue poised on the bridge of her slim hand, and shook her crop of short dark chestnut hair. "I shall never do it." "Nothing venture." "All right." The cue struck, the ball rolled. "There. Bad luck. Never mind." Then they saw him, and Soames said, "I'll mark for you." He sat down on the raised seat beneath the marker, trim and tired, furtively studying those two young faces. When the game was over, Mont came up to him. "I've started in, sir. Rum game business, isn't it? I suppose you saw a lot of human nature as a solicitor." "I did. Shall I tell you what I've noticed? People are quite on the wrong tack in offering less than they can afford to give. They ought to offer more and work backward." Soames raised his eyebrows. "Suppose the more is accepted?" "That doesn't matter a little bit," said Mont. "It's much more paying to abate a price than to increase it. For instance, say we offer an author good terms. He naturally takes them. Then we go into it, find we can't publish at a decent profit, and tell him so. He's got confidence in us because we've been generous to him, and he comes down like a lamb and bears us no malice. But if we offer him poor terms at the start, he doesn't take them, so we have to advance them to get him, and he thinks us damned screws into the bargain." "Try buying pictures on that system," said Soames. "An offer accepted is a contract. Haven't you learned that?" Young Mont turned his head to where Fleur was standing in the window. "No," he said. "I wish I had. Then there's another thing. Always let a man off a bargain if he wants to be let off." "As advertisement," said Soames dryly. "Of course it is, but I meant on principle." "Does your firm work on those lines?" "Not yet," said Mont, "but it'll come." "And they will go." "Not really, sir. I'm making any number of observations, and they all confirm my theory. Human nature is consistently underrated in business. People do themselves out of an awful lot of pleasure and profit by that. Of course, you must be perfectly genuine and open, but that's easy if you feel it. The more human and generous you are, the better chance you've got in business." Soames rose. "Are you a partner?" "Not for 6 months yet." "The rest of the firm had better make haste and retire." Mont laughed. "You'll see," he said. "There's going to be a big change. The possessive principle has got its shutters up." "What?" said Soames. "The house is to let. Good-bye, sir. I'm off now." Soames watched his daughter give her hand, saw her wince at the squeeze it received, and distinctly heard the young man's sigh as he passed out. Then she came from the window, trailing her finger along the mahogany edge of the billiard table. Watching her, Soames knew that she was going to ask him something. Her finger fell round the last pocket, and she looked up. "Have you done anything to stop John writing to me, father?" Soames shook his head. "You haven't seen, then," he said. "His father died just a week ago today." "Oh." In her startled, frowning face he saw the instant struggle to apprehend what this would mean. "Poor John! Why didn't you tell me, father?" "I never know," said Soames slowly. "You don't confide in me." "I would if you'd help me, dear. Perhaps I shall." Fleur clasped her hands. "Oh, darling, when one wants a thing fearfully, one doesn't think of other people. Don't be angry with me." Soames put out his hand as if pushing away an aspersion. "I'm cogitating," he said. What on earth had made him use a word like that? Has young Mont been bothering you again? Fleur smiled. Oh, Michael, he's always bothering, but he's such a good sort. I don't mind him. Well, said Soames, I'm tired. I shall go and have a nap before dinner. He went up to his picture gallery, lay down on the couch there, and closed his eyes. A terrible responsibility, this girl of his, whose mother was... what was she? A terrible responsibility. Help her? How could he help her? He could not alter the fact that he was her father, or that Irene... What was it young Mont had said? Some nonsense about the possessive instinct. Shut us up. To let. Silly. The sultry air, charged with the scent of meadow sweet, of river and roses, closed on his senses, drowsing them. End of section 28. Section 29 of the Forsyte Saga, Volume 3, To Let, by John Galsworthy. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Peter Dann. The Fixed Idea. The fixed idea, which has outrun more constables than any other form of human disorder, has never more speed and stamina than when it takes the avid guise of love. To hedges and ditches and doors, to humans without ideas, fixed or otherwise, to perambulators and the contents sucking their fixed ideas, even to the other sufferers from this fast malady, the fixed idea of love pays no attention. It runs with eyes turned inward to its own light, oblivious of all other stars. Those with the fixed ideas that human happiness depends on their art, on vivisecting dogs, on hating foreigners, on paying super tax, on remaining ministers, on making wheels go round, on preventing their neighbours from being divorced, on conscientious objection, Greek roots, church dogma, paradox and superiority to everybody else, with other forms of egomania, all are unstable compared with him or her whose fixed idea is the possession of some her or him. And though Fleur, those chilly summer days, pursued the scattered life of a little Forsyte whose frocks are paid for and whose business is pleasure, she was, as Winifred would have said in the latest fashion of speech, honest to God, indifferent to it all. She wished and wished for the moon, which sailed in cold skies above the river or the green park where she went to town. She even kept John's letters, covered with pink silk, on her heart, than which, in days when corsets were so low, sentiment so despised, and chests so out of fashion, there could perhaps have been no greater proof of the fixity of her idea. After hearing of his father's death, she wrote to John, and received his answer 3 days later on her return from a river picnic. It was his first letter since their meeting at June's. She opened it with misgiving, and read with dismay, "Since I saw you, I've heard everything about the past. I won't tell it you. I think you knew it when we met at June's. She says you did. If you did, Fleur, you ought to have told me. I expect you only heard your father's side of it. I have heard my mother's. It's dreadful. Now that she's so sad, I can't do anything to hurt her more. Of course, I long for you all day, but I daren't believe now that we shall ever come together. There's something too strong pulling us apart." So, her deception had found her out. But John, she felt, had forgiven that. It was what he said of his mother which caused the guttering in her heart and the weak sensation in her legs. Her first impulse was to reply, her second not to reply. These impulses were constantly renewed in the days which followed, while desperation grew within her. She was not her father's child for nothing. The tenacity which had at once made and undone Soames was her backbone too, frilled and embroidered by French grace and quickness. Instinctively she conjugated the verb to have always with the pronoun I. She concealed, however, all signs of her growing desperation, and pursued such river pleasures as the wind and rain of a disagreeable June permitted, as if she had no care in the world. Nor did any sucking baronet ever neglect the business of a publisher more consistently than her attendant spirit, Michael Mont. To Soames she was a puzzle. He was almost deceived by this careless gaiety. Almost, because he did not fail to mark her eyes often fixed on nothing, and the film of light shining from her bedroom window late at night. What was she thinking and brooding over into small hours when she ought to have been asleep? But he dared not ask what was in her mind, and since that one little talk in the billiard-room, she said nothing to him. In this taciturn condition of affairs, it chanced that Winifred invited them to lunch, and to go afterward to a most amusing little play, The Beggar's Opera, and would they bring a man to make 4? Soames, whose attitude towards theatres was to go to nothing, accepted, because Fleur's attitude was to go to everything. They motored up, taking Michael Mont, who, being in his 7th heaven, was found by Winifred very amusing. The Beggar's Opera puzzled Soames. The people were very unpleasant, the whole thing very cynical. Winifred was intrigued by the dresses. The music, too, did not displease her. At the opera the night before she had arrived too early for the Russian ballet, and found the stage occupied by singers, for a whole hour pale or apoplectic from terror lest by some dreadful inadvertence they might drop into a tune. Michael Mont was enraptured with the whole thing, and all three wondered what Fleur was thinking of it. But Fleur was not thinking of it. Her fixed idea stood on the stage and sang with Polly Peachum, mimed with Filch, danced with Jenny Diver, postured with Lucy Lockett, kissed, trolled, and cuddled with Macheath. Her lips might smile, her hands applaud, but the comic old masterpiece made no more impression on her than if it had been pathetic, like a modern revue. When they embarked in the car to return, she ached because John was not sitting next to her instead of Michael Mont. When, at some jolt, the young man's arm touched hers, as if by accident, she only thought, if that were John's arm. When his cheerful voice, tempered by her proximity, murmured above the sound of the car's progress, she smiled and answered, thinking, if that were John's voice. And when once he said, Fleur, you look a perfect angel in that dress, she answered, oh, do you like it? Thinking, if only John could see it. During this drive she took a resolution. She would go to Robin Hill and see him, alone. She would take the car without word beforehand to him or to her father. It was 9 days since his letter, and she could wait no longer. On Monday she would go. The decision made her well disposed towards young Mont. With something to look forward to, she could afford to tolerate and respond. He might stay to dinner, propose to her as usual, dance with her, press her hand, sigh, do what he liked. He was only a nuisance when he interfered with her fixed idea. She was even sorry for him, so far as it was possible to be sorry for anybody but herself just now. At dinner he seemed to talk more wildly than usual about what he called the death of the close borough. She paid little attention, but her father seemed paying a good deal, with a smile on his face which meant opposition, if not anger. The younger generation doesn't think as you do, sir, does it, Fleur? Fleur shrugged her shoulders. The younger generation was just John, and she did not know what he was thinking. Young people will think as I do when they're my age, Mr. Mont. Human nature doesn't change. I admit that, sir, but the forms of thought change with the times. The pursuit of self-interest is a form of thought that's going out. Indeed, to mind one's own business is not a form of thought, Mr. Mont. It's an instinct. Yes, when John was the business. But what is one's business, sir? That's the point. Everybody's business is going to be one's business, isn't it, Fleur? Fleur only smiled. If not, added young Mont, there'll be blood. People have talked like that from time immemorial. But you'll admit, sir, that the sense of property is dying out. I should say increasing among those who have none. Well, look at me. I'm heir to an entailed estate. I don't want the thing. I'd cut the entail tomorrow. You're not married, and you don't know what you're talking about. Fleur saw the young man's eyes turn rather piteously upon her. Do you really mean that marriage— he began. Society is built on marriage, came from between her father's close lips. Marriage and its consequences. Do you want to do away with it? Young Mont made a distracted gesture. Silence brooded over the dinner-table, covered with spoons bearing the Forsyte crest, a pheasant proper. under the electric light in an alabaster globe, and outside the river evening darkened, charged with heavy moisture and sweet scents. Monday, thought Fleur, Monday. End of section 29. Section 30 of the Forsyte Saga, Volume 3, To Let, by John Galsworthy. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Peter Dann. Desperate. The weeks which followed the death of his father were sad and empty to the only Jolyon Forsyte left. The necessary forms and ceremonies, the reading of the will, valuation of the estate, distribution of the legacies, were enacted over the head, as it were, of one not yet of age. Jolyon was cremated. By his special wish, no one attended that ceremony or wore black for him. The succession of his property, controlled to some extent by old Jolyon's will, left his widow in possession of Robin Hill, with £2,500 a year for life. Apart from this, the two wills worked together in some complicated way to ensure that each of Jolyon's 3 children should have an equal share in their grandfather's and father's property in the future as in the present, save only that John, by virtue of his sex, would have control of his capital when he was 21, while June and Holly would only have the spirit of theirs, in order that their children might have the body after them. If they had no children, it would all come to John if he outlived them. And since June was 50 and Holly nearly 40, it was considered in Lincoln's Inn Fields that, but for the cruelty of income tax, young John would be as warm a man as his father when he died. All this was nothing to John, and little enough to his mother. It was June who did everything needful for one who had left his affairs in perfect order. When she had gone and those two were alone again in the great house, alone with death drawing them together, and love driving them apart, John passed very painful days, secretly disgusted and disappointed with himself. His mother would look at him with such a patient sadness, which yet had in it an instinctive pride, as if she were reserving her defence. If she smiled, he was angry that his answering smile should be so grudging and unnatural. He did not judge or condemn her. That was all too remote. Indeed, the idea of doing so had never come to him. No, he was grudging and unnatural because he couldn't have what he wanted because of her. There was one alleviation, much to do in connection with his father's career, which could not be safely entrusted to June, though she had offered to undertake it. Both John and his mother had felt that if she took his portfolios, unexhibited drawings, and unfinished matter away with her, the work would encounter such icy blasts from Paul Post and other frequenters of her studio that it would soon be frozen out even of her warm heart. On its old-fashioned plane and of its kind the work was good, and they could not bear the thought of its subjection to ridicule. A one-man exhibition of his work was the least testimony they could pay to one they had loved, and on preparation for this they spent many hours together. John came to have a curiously increased respect for his father. The quiet tenacity with which he had converted a mediocre talent into something really individual was disclosed by these researches. There was a great mass of work with a rare continuity of growth in depth and reach of vision. Nothing certainly went very deep or reached very high, but such as the work was, it was thorough, conscientious, and complete. And remembering his father's utter absence of side or self-assertion, the chaffing humility with which he had always spoken of his own efforts, ever calling himself an amateur, John could not help feeling that he had never really known his father. To take himself seriously, yet never that he did so, seemed to have been his ruling principle. There was something in this which appealed to the boy, and made him heartily endorse his mother's comment. He had true refinement. He couldn't help thinking of others, whatever he did. And when he took a resolution which went counter, he did it with the minimum of defiance, not like the age, is it? Twice in his life he had to go against everything, and yet it never made him bitter. John saw tears running down her face, which she had once turned away from him. But she was so quiet about her loss that sometimes he had thought she didn't feel it much. Now, as he looked at her, he felt how far he fell short of the reserved power and dignity in both his father and his mother. And, stealing up to her, he put his arm round her waist. She kissed him swiftly, but with a sort of passion, and went out of the room. The studio, where they had been sorting and labelling, had once been Holly's schoolroom, devoted to her silkworms, dried lavender, music, and other forms of instruction. Now, at the end of July, despite its northern and eastern aspect, a warm and slumberous air came in between the long faded lilac linen curtains, to redeem a little the departed glory, as of a field that is golden and gone, clinging to a room which its master has left. Irene had placed on the paint-stained table a bowl of red roses. This and Jolyon's favourite cat, who still clung to the deserted habitat, were the pleasant spots in that dishevelled, sad workroom. John, at the north window, sniffing air mysteriously scented with warm strawberries, heard a car drive up. The lawyers were again about some nonsense. Why did that scent make one so ache? And where did it come from? There were no strawberry beds on this side of the house. Instinctively he took a crumpled sheet of paper from his pocket and wrote down some broken words. A warmth began spreading in his chest. He rubbed the palms of his hands together. Presently he had jotted this: "If I could make a little song to soothe my heart, I'd make it all of little things, the plash of water, rub of wings, the puffing off of Dandy's crown, the hiss of raindrops spilling down, the purr of cat, the trill of bird, and every whispering I've heard from willy wind in leaves and grass, and all the distant drones that pass. A song as tender and as light as flowers or butterfly in flight, and when I saw it opening, I'd let it fly and sing." He was still muttering it over to himself at the window when he heard his name called, and turning round saw Fleur. At that amazing apparition he made at first no movement and no sound, while her clear, vivid glance ravished his heart. Then he went forward to the table, saying, "How nice of you to come," and saw her flinch as if he had thrown something at her. "I asked for you," she said, "and they showed me up here, but I can go away again." John clutched the paint-stained table. Her face and figure in its frilly frock photographed itself with such startling vividness upon his eye that if she had sunk through the floor he must still have seen her. "I know I told you a lie, John, but I told it out of love." "Yes, yes, that's nothing. I didn't answer your letter. What was the use? There wasn't anything to answer. I wanted to see you instead." She held out both her hands, and John grasped them across the table. He tried to say something, but all his attention was given to trying not to hurt her hands. His own felt so hard and hers so soft. She said, almost defiantly, "That old story, was it so very dreadful?" "Yes." In his voice, too, there was a note of defiance. She dragged her hands away. "I didn't think in these days boys were tied to their mother's apron strings." John's chin went up as if he had been struck. "Oh, I didn't mean it, John. What a horrible thing to say." Swiftly she came close to him. "John, dear, I didn't mean it." "All right." She had put her two hands on his shoulder, and her forehead down on them. The brim of her hat touched his neck, and he felt it quivering. But in a sort of paralysis he made no response. She let go of his shoulder and drew away. "Well, I'll go if you don't want me, but I never thought you'd have given me up." "I haven't," cried John, coming suddenly to life. "I can't. I'll try again." Her eyes gleamed. She swayed towards him. "John, I love you. Don't give me up. If you do, I don't know what... I feel so desperate. What does it matter, all that past, compared with this?" She clung to him. He kissed her eyes, her cheeks, her lips. But while he kissed her, he saw the sheets of that letter fallen down on the floor of his bedroom, his father's white, dead face, his mother kneeling before it. Fleur's whispered, "Make her promise. Oh, John, try," seemed childish in his ear. He felt curiously old. "I promise," he muttered. "Only you don't understand." "She wants to spoil our lives just because—" "Yes, of what?" Again that challenge in his voice, and she did not answer. Her arms tightened round him, and he returned her kisses, but even while he yielded, the poison worked in him, the poison of the letter. Fleur did not know. She did not understand. She misjudged his mother. She came from the enemy's camp. So lovely, and he loved her so, yet even in her embrace he could not help the memory of Holly's words, "I think she has a having nature," and his mother's, "My darling boy, don't think of me, think of yourself." When she was gone, like a passionate dream, leaving her image on his eyes, her kisses on his lips, such an ache in his heart, John leaned in the window, listening to the car bearing her away. Still the scent as of warm strawberries, still the little summer sounds that should make his song, still all the promise of youth and happiness in sighing, floating, fluttering July, and his heart torn, yearning strong in him, hope high in him, yet with its eyes cast down, as if ashamed. The miserable task before him. If Fleur was desperate, so was he, watching the poplars swaying, the white clouds passing, the sunlight on the grass. He waited till evening, till after their almost silent dinner, till his mother had played to him, and still he waited, feeling that she knew what he was waiting to say. She kissed him and went upstairs, and still he lingered, watching the moonlight and the moths and that unreality of colouring which steals along and stains a summer night. And he would have given anything to be back again in the past, barely 3 months back, or away forward, years in the future. The present, with its dark cruelty of a decision one way or the other, seemed impossible. He realized now so much more keenly what his mother felt than he had at first, as if the story in that letter had been a poisonous germ producing a kind of fever of partisanship, so that he really felt there were 2 camps, his mother's and his, Fleur's and her father's. It might be a dead thing, that old tragic ownership and enmity, but dead things were poisonous till time had cleaned them away. Even his love felt tainted, less illusioned, more of the earth, and with a treacherous lurking doubt lest Fleur, like her father, might want to own, not articulate, just a stealing haunt, horribly unworthy, which crept in and about the ardour of his memories, touched with its tarnishing breath the vividness and grace of that charmed face and figure. A doubt not real enough to convince him of its presence, just real enough to deflower a perfect faith. And perfect faith to John, not yet 20, was essential. He still had youth's eagerness to give with both hands, to take with neither, to give lovingly to one who had his own impulsive generosity. Surely she had. He got up from the window-seat and roamed in the big grey ghostly room, whose walls were hung with silvered canvas. This house, his father said in that deathbed letter, had been built for his mother to live in, with Fleur's father. He put out his hand in the half-dark, as if to grasp the shadowy hand of the dead. He clenched, trying to feel the thin, vanished fingers of his father, to squeeze them and reassure him that he was on his father's side. Tears, prisoned within him, made his eyes feel dry and hot. He went back to the window. It was warmer, not so eerie, more comforting outside, where the moon hung golden, 3 days off full. The freedom of the night was comforting. If only Fleur and he had met on some desert island without a past, and nature for their house. John had still his high regard for desert islands where breadfruit grew and the water was blue above the coral. The night was deep, was free. There was enticement in it, a lure, a promise, a refuge from entanglement and love. Milksop tied to his mother's. His cheeks burned. He shut the window, drew curtains over it, switched off the lighted sconce, and went upstairs. The door of his room was open, the light turned up. His mother, still in her evening gown, was standing at the window. She turned and said, "Sit down, John. Let's talk." She sat down on the window-seat, John on his bed. She had her profile turned to him, and the beauty and grace of her figure, the delicate line of the brow, the nose, the neck, the strange and, as it were, remote refinement of her, moved him. His mother never belonged to her surroundings. She came into them from somewhere, as it were. What was she going to say to him, who had in his heart such things to say to her? "I know Fleur came today. I'm not surprised." It was as though she had added, "She is her father's daughter." And John's heart hardened. Irene went on quietly. "I have father's letter. I picked it up that night and kept it. Would you like it back, dear?" John shook his head. "I have read it, of course, before he gave it to you. It didn't quite do justice to my criminality." "Mother," burst from John's lips. "He put it very sweetly, but I know that in marrying Fleur's father without love I did a dreadful thing. An unhappy marriage, John, can play such havoc with other lives besides one's own. You are fearfully young, my darling, and fearfully loving. Do you think you can possibly be happy with this girl?" Staring at her dark eyes, darker now from pain, John answered, "Yes, oh yes, if you could be." Irene smiled. "Admiration of beauty and longing for possession are not love. If yours were another case like mine, John, where the deepest things are stifled, the flesh joined, and the spirit at war—" "Why should it, mother? You think she must be like her father, but she's not. I've seen him." Again the smile came on Irene's lips, and in John something wavered. There was such irony and experience in that smile. "You are a giver, John. She is a taker." That unworthy doubt, that haunting uncertainty again. He said with vehemence, "She isn't! She isn't! It's only because I can't bear to make you unhappy, mother, now that father—" He thrust his fists against his forehead. Irene got up. "I told you that night, dear, not to mind me. I meant it. Think of yourself and your own happiness. I can stand what's left. I've brought it on myself." Again the word "mother" burst from John's lips. She came over to him and put her hands over his. "Do you feel your head, darling?" John shook it. What he felt was in his chest, a sort of tearing asunder of the tissue there by the two loves. "I shall always love you the same, John, whatever you do. You won't lose anything." She smoothed his hair gently and walked away. He heard the door shut, and rolling over on the bed, lay, stifling his breath, with an awful held-up feeling within him. End of section 30. Section 31 of the Forsyte Saga, Volume 3, To Let, by John Galsworthy. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Peter Dann. Embassy. Enquiring for her at tea-time, Soames learned that Fleur had been out in the car since 2. 3 hours. Where had she gone? Up to London without a word to him? He had never become quite reconciled with cars. He had embraced them in principle, like the born empiricist or Forsyte that he was, adopting each symptom of progress as it came along with, "Well, we couldn't do without them now." But in fact he found them tearing, great, smelly things. Obliged by Annette to have one, a roll-hard with pearl-grey cushions, electric light, little mirrors, trays for the ashes of cigarettes, flower vases, all smelling of petrol and stephanotis, he regarded it much as he used to regard his brother-in-law, Montague Darty. The thing typified all that was fast, insecure, and subcutaneously oily in modern life. As modern life became faster, looser, younger, Soames was becoming older, slower, tighter, more and more in thought and language like his father, James, before him. He was almost aware of it himself. Pace and progress pleased him less and less. There was an ostentation, too, about a car which he considered provocative in the prevailing mood of labour. On one occasion that fellow Sims had driven over the only vested interest of a working man. Soames had not forgotten the behaviour of its master, when not many people would have stopped to put up with it. He had been sorry for the dog, and quite prepared to take its part against the car, if that ruffian hadn't been so outrageous. With 4 hours, fast becoming 5, and still no Fleur, all the old car-wise feelings he had experienced in person and by proxy bawled within him, and sinking sensations troubled the pit of his stomach. At 7 he telephoned to Winifred by trunk call. No, Fleur had not been to Green Street. Then where was she? Visions of his beloved daughter rolled up in her pretty frills, all blood and dust-stained in some hideous catastrophe, began to haunt him. He went to her room and spied among her things. She had taken nothing, no dressing-case, no jewellery, and this, a relief in one sense, increased his fears of an accident. Terrible to be helpless when his loved one was missing, especially when he couldn't bear fuss or publicity of any kind. What should he do if she were not back by nightfall? At 7:45 he heard the car. A great weight lifted from off his heart. He hurried down. She was getting out, pale and tired-looking, but nothing wrong. He met her in the hall. "You've frightened me. Where have you been?" "To Robin Hill. I'm sorry, dear. I had to go. I'll tell you afterward." And with a flying kiss she ran upstairs. Soames waited in the drawing-room. To Robin Hill. What did that portend? It was not a subject they could discuss at dinner, consecrated to the susceptibilities of the butler. The agony of nerves Soames had been through, the relief he felt at her safety, softened his power to condemn what she had done or resist what she was going to do. He waited in a relaxed stupor for her revelation. Life was a queer business. There he was at 65 and no more in command of things than if he had not spent 40 years in building up security, always something one couldn't get on terms with. In the pocket of his dinner jacket was a letter from Annette. She was coming back in a fortnight. He knew nothing of what she had been doing out there, and he was glad that he did not. Her absence had been a relief. Out of sight was out of mind, and now she was coming back. Another worry. And the Boulderbury old chrome was gone. Demetrius had got it, or because that anonymous letter had put it out of his thoughts. He furtively remarked the strained look on his daughter's face, as if she too were gazing at a picture that she couldn't buy. He almost wished the war back. Worries didn't seem then quite so worrying. From the caress in her voice, the look on her face, he became certain that she wanted something from him, uncertain whether it would be wise of him to give it her. He pushed his savoury away uneaten, and even joined her in a cigarette. After dinner she set the electric piano player going, and he augured the worst when she sat down on a cushioned footstool at his knee and put her hand on his. "Darling, be nice to me. I had to see John. He wrote to me. He's going to try what he can do with his mother. But I've been thinking. It's really in your hands, Father, if you'd persuade her that it doesn't mean renewing the past in any way. That I shall stay yours and John will stay hers, that you need never see him or her, and she need never see you or me. Only you could persuade her, dear, because only you could promise. One can't promise for other people. Surely it wouldn't be too awkward for you to see her just this once, now that John's father is dead." "Too awkward," Soames repeated. "The whole thing's preposterous." "You know," said Fleur, without looking up, "you wouldn't mind seeing her really." Soames was silent. Her words had expressed a truth too deep for him to admit. She slipped her fingers between his own. Hot, slim, eager, they clung there. This child of his would corkscrew her way into a brick wall. "What am I to do if you won't, Father?" she said very softly. "I'll do anything for your happiness," said Soames, "but this isn't for your happiness." "Oh, it is, it is." "It'll only stir things up," he said grimly. "But they are stirred up. The thing is to quiet them, to make her feel that this is just our lives and has nothing to do with yours or hers. You can do it, Father. I know you can." "You know a great deal, then," was Soames' glum answer. "If you will, John and I will wait a year, 2 years, if you like." "It seems to me," murmured Soames, "that you care nothing about what I feel." Fleur pressed his hand against her cheek. "I do, darling, but you wouldn't like me to be awfully miserable." How she wheedled to get her ends, and trying with all his might to think she really cared for him. He was not sure. All she cared for was this boy. Why should he help her to get this boy, who was killing her affection for himself? Why should he? By the laws of the Forsytes it was foolish. There was nothing to be had out of it. Nothing. To give her to that boy, to pass her into the enemy's camp under the influence of the woman who had injured him so deeply. Slowly, inevitably, he would lose this flower of his life, and suddenly he was conscious that his hand was wet. His heart gave a little painful jump. He couldn't bear to cry. He put his other hand quickly over hers, and a tear dropped on that too. He couldn't go on like this. Well, he said, I'll think it over and do what I can. Come. If she must have it for her happiness, she must. He couldn't refuse to help her. And lest she should begin to thank him, he got out of his chair and went up to the piano player, making that noise. It ran down as he reached it, with a faint buzz. That musical box of his nursery days, the harmonious blacksmith, glorious port, the thing that always made him miserable when his mother set it going on Sunday afternoons. Here it was again, the same thing, only larger, more expensive, and now it played The Wild Wild Women and The Policeman's Holiday, and he was no longer in black velvet with a sky-blue collar. Profond's right, he thought. There's nothing in it. We're all progressing to the grave. And with that surprising mental comment, he walked out. He did not see Fleur again that night, but at breakfast her eyes followed him about with an appeal he could not escape, not that he intended to try. No, he had made up his mind to the nerve-wracking business. He would go to Robin Hill, to that house of memories. Pleasant memory, the last, of going down to keep that boy's father and Irene apart by threatening divorce. He had often thought since that it had clinched their union, and now he was going to clinch the union of that boy with his girl. I don't know what I've done, he thought, to have such things thrust on me. He went up by train and down by train, and from the station walked by the long rising lane, still very much as he remembered it over 30 years ago. Funny, so near London. Someone evidently was holding on to the land there. This speculation soothed him, moving between the high hedges slowly so as not to get overheated, though the day was chill enough. After all was said and done, there was something real about land. It didn't shift. Land and good pictures. The values might fluctuate a bit, but on the whole they were always going up, worth holding on to, in a world where there was such a lot of unreality, cheap building, changing fashions, such a here today and gone tomorrow spirit. The French were right, perhaps, with their peasant proprietorship, though he had no opinion of the French. One's bit of land, something solid in it. He had heard peasant proprietors described as a pig-headed lot, had heard young Mont call his father a pig-headed morning poster, disrespectful young devil. Well, there were worse things than being pig-headed or reading the Morning Post. There was Profond and his tribe, and all these Labour chaps, and loud-mouthed politicians, and wild, wild women. A lot of worse things. And suddenly Soames became conscious of feeling weak and hot and shaky. Sheer nerves at the meeting before him, as Aunt Julie might have said, quoting Superior Dosset. His nerves were in a proper fatigue. He could see the house now among the trees. The house he had watched being built, intending it for himself and this woman, who by such a strange fate had lived in it with another after all. He began to think of Demetrius, local loans and other forms of investment. He could not afford to meet her with his nerves all shaking, he who represented the day of judgment for her on earth as it was in heaven, he, legal ownership personified, meeting lawless beauty incarnate. His dignity demanded impassivity during this embassy designed to link their offspring, who, if she had behaved herself, would have been her brother and sister. That wretched tune, The Wild, Wild Women, kept running in his head perversely, for tunes did not run there as a rule. Passing the poplars in front of the house, he thought, how they've grown. I had them planted. A maid answered his ring. Will you say Mr. Forsyte, on a very special matter? If she realized who he was, quite probably she would not see him. By George, he thought, hardening as the tug came, it's a topsy-turvy affair. The maid came back. Would the gentleman state his business, please? Say it concerns Mr. John, said Soames. And once more he was alone in that hall with the pool of grey-white marble designed by her first lover. Ah, she had been a bad lot, had loved two men, and not himself. He must remember that when he came face to face with her once more. And suddenly he saw her in the opening chink between the long, heavy purple curtains, swaying as if in hesitation, the old perfect poise and line, the old startled, dark-eyed gravity, the old calm, defensive voice. "Will you come in, please?" He passed through that opening. As in the picture gallery and the confectioner's shop, she seemed to him still beautiful. And this was the first time, the very first, since he married her 37 years ago, that he was speaking to her without the legal right to call her his. She was not wearing black, one of that fellow's radical notions, he supposed. "I apologize for coming," he said glumly, "but this business must be settled one way or the other." "Won't you sit down?" "No, thank you." Anger at his false position, impatience of ceremony between them, mastered him, and the words came tumbling out. "It's an infernal mischance. I've done my best to discourage it. I consider my daughter crazy, but I've got into the habit of indulging her. That's why I'm here. I suppose you're fond of your son?" "Devotedly." "Well, it rests with him." He had a sense of being met and baffled. Always she had baffled him, even in those old first married days. "It's a mad notion," he said. "It is. If you had only... well, they might have been..." He did not finish that sentence, brother and sister, and all this saved, but he saw her shudder as if he had, and stung by the sight, he crossed over to the window. Out there the trees had not grown. They couldn't. They were old. "So far as I am concerned," he said, "you may make your mind easy. I desire to see neither you nor your son if this marriage comes about. Young people in these days are unaccountable, but I can't bear to see my daughter unhappy. What am I to say to her when I go back?" "Please say to her, as I said to you, that it rests with John." "You don't oppose it?" "With all my heart, not with my lips." Soames stood, biting his finger. "I remember an evening," he said suddenly, and was silent. What was there in this woman that would not fit into the four corners of his hate or condemnation? "Where is he, your son?" "Up in his father's studio, I think." "Perhaps you'd have him down." He watched her ring the bell. He watched the maid come in. "Please tell Mr. John that I want him." "If it rests with him," said Soames hurriedly, when the maid was gone, "I suppose I may take it for granted that this unnatural marriage will take place. In that case there'll be formalities. Whom do I deal with? Herrings?" Irene nodded. "You don't propose to live with them?" Irene shook her head. "What happens to this house?" "It will be as John wishes." "This house," said Soames suddenly. "I had hopes when I began it. If they live in it, their children... They say there's such a thing as nemesis. Do you believe in it?" "Yes." "Oh, you do." He had come back from the window and was standing close to her, who, in the curve of her grand piano, was, as it were, embayed. "I am not likely to see you again," he said slowly. "Will you shake hands?" His lip quivered. The words came out jerkily. "And let the past die." He held out his hand. Her pale face grew paler. Her eyes, so dark, rested immovably on his. Her hands remained clasped in front of her. He heard a sound and turned. That boy was standing in the opening of the curtains. Very queer he looked, hardly recognizable as the young fellow he had seen in the gallery off Cork Street. Very queer, much older, no youth in the face at all, haggard, rigid, his hair ruffled, his eyes deep in his head. Soames made an effort and said, with a lift of his lip, not quite a smile, not quite a sneer, "Well, young man, I'm here for my daughter. It rests with you, it seems, this matter. Your mother leaves it in your hands." The boy continued staring at his mother's face and made no answer. "For my daughter's sake I've brought myself to come," said Soames. "What am I to say to her when I go back?" Still looking at his mother, the boy said quietly, "Tell Fleur that it's no good, please. I must do as my father wished before he died." "John!" "It's all right, mother." In a kind of stupefaction, Soames looked from one to the other. Then, taking up hat and umbrella, which he had put down on a chair, he walked toward the curtains. The boy stood aside for him to go by. He passed through and heard the grate of the rings as the curtains were drawn behind him. The sound liberated something in his chest. So that's that, he thought, and passed out of the front door. End of section 31. Section 32 of the Forsyte Saga, Volume 3, To Let, by John Galsworthy. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Peter Dann. The Dark Tune. As Soames walked away from the house at Robin Hill, the sun broke through the grey of that chill afternoon in smoky radiance. So absorbed in landscape painting that he seldom looked seriously for effects of nature out of doors, he was struck by that moody effulgence. It mourned with a triumph suitable to his own feeling. Victory in defeat. His embassy had come to naught, but he was rid of those people, had regained his daughter at the expense of her happiness. What would Fleur say to him? Would she believe he had done his best? And under that sunlight, faring on the elms, hazels, hollies of the lane, and those unexploited fields, Soames felt dread. She would be terribly upset. He must appeal to her pride. That boy had given her up, declared part and lot with the woman who so long ago had given her father up. Soames clenched his hands. Given him up, and why? What had been wrong with him? And once more he felt the malaise of one who contemplates himself as seen by another, like a dog who chances on his reflection in a mirror and is intrigued and anxious at the unseizable thing. Not in a hurry to get home, he dined in town at the connoisseur's. While eating a pear, it suddenly occurred to him that if he had not gone down to Robin Hill, the boy might not have so decided. He remembered the expression on his face while his mother was refusing the hand he had held out. A strange, an awkward thought. Had Fleur cooked her own goose by trying to make too sure? He reached home at 9:30. While the car was passing in at one drive gate, he heard the grinding sputter of a motorcycle passing out by the other. Young Mont, no doubt, so Fleur had not been lonely. But he went in with a sinking heart. In the cream-panelled drawing-room she was sitting with her elbows on her knees and her chin on her clasped hands in front of a white camellia plant which filled the fireplace. That glance at her before she saw him renewed his dread. What was she seeing among those white camellias? "Well, father." Soames shook his head. His tongue failed him. This was murderous work. He saw her eyes dilate, her lips quivering. What? Quick, father!" "My dear," said Soames, I did my best, but—" And again he shook his head. Fleur ran to him and put a hand on each of his shoulders. "She?" "No," muttered Soames. "He. I was to tell you that it was no use. He must do what his father wished before he died." He caught her by the waist. "Come, child, don't let them hurt you. They're not worth your little finger." Fleur tore herself from his grasp. "You didn't. You couldn't have tried. You betrayed me, father." Bitterly wounded, Soames gazed at her passionate figure writhing there in front of him. "You didn't try. You didn't. I was a fool. I won't believe he ever could. Only yesterday Oh, why did I ask you?" "Yes," said Soames quietly. "Why did you?" "I swallowed my feelings. I did my best for you, against my judgment, and this is my reward. Good night." With every nerve in his body twitching, he went toward the door. Fleur darted after him. "He gives me up? You mean that, father?" Soames turned and forced himself to answer. "Yes." "Oh," cried Fleur, what could you have done in those old days?" The breathless sense of really monstrous injustice cut the power of speech in Soames' throat. What had he done? What had they done to him? And with quite unconscious dignity he put his hand on his breast and looked at her. "It's a shame!" cried Fleur passionately. Soames went out. He mounted, slow and icy, to his picture gallery and paced among his treasures. Outrageous! Oh, outrageous! She was spoiled. And who had spoiled her? He stood still before the Goya copy, accustomed to her own way in everything, flower of his life, and now she couldn't have it. He turned to the window for some air. Daylight was dying, the moon rising, gold behind the poplars. What sound was that? Why, that piano thing, a dark tune, with a thrum and a throb. She had set it going. What comfort could she get from that? His eyes caught movement down there beyond the lawn, under the trellis of rambler roses and young acacia trees where the moonlight fell. There she was, roaming up and down. His heart gave a little sickening jump. What would she do under this blow? How could he tell? What did he know of her? He had only loved her all his life, looked on her as the apple of his eye. He knew nothing, had no notion. There she was, and that dark tune, and the river gleaming in the moonlight. I must go out, he thought. He hastened down to the drawing-room, lighted just as he had left it, with the piano thrumming out that waltz or foxtrot, or whatever they called it in these days, and passed through onto the veranda. Where could he watch without her seeing him? And he stole down through the fruit garden to the boat-house. He was between her and the river now, and his heart felt lighter. She was his daughter and Annette's. She wouldn't do anything foolish, but there it was. He didn't know. From the boathouse window he could see the last acacia and the spin of her skirt when she turned in her restless march. That tune had run down at last. Thank goodness. He crossed the floor and looked through the farther window at the water slowly flowing past the lilies. It made little bubbles against them, bright where a moonstreak fell. He remembered suddenly that early morning when he had slept on the houseboat after his father died, and she had just been born, nearly 19 years ago. Even now he recalled the unaccustomed world when he woke up, the strange feeling it had given him. That day the second passion of his life began, for this girl of his roaming under the acacias. What a comfort she had been to him! And all the soreness and sense of outrage left him. If he could make her happy again, he didn't care. An owl flew, queaking, queaking. A bat flitted by. The moonlight brightened and broadened on the water. How long was she going to roam about like this? He went back to the window and suddenly saw her coming down to the bank. She stood quite close on the landing stage, and Soames watched, clenching his hands. Should he speak to her? His excitement was intense. The stillness of her figure, its youth, its absorption in despair, in longing, in itself. He would always remember it, moonlit like that, and the faint sweet reek of the river and the shivering of the willow leaves. She had everything in the world that he could give her, except the one thing that she could not have because of him. The perversity of things hurt him at that moment, as might a fishbone in his throat. Then, with an infinite relief, he saw her turn back toward the house. What could he give her to make amends? Pearls, travel, horses, other young men, anything she wanted, that he might lose the memory of her young figure lonely by the water. There, she had set that tune going again. Why, it was a mania, dark, thrumming, faint, travelling from the house. It was as though she had said, "If I can't have something to keep me going, I shall die of this." Soames dimly understood. Well, if it helped her, let her keep it thrumming on all night. And mousing back through the fruit garden, he regained the veranda. Though he meant to go in and speak to her now, he still hesitated, not knowing what to say, trying hard to recall how it felt to be thwarted in love. He ought to know, ought to remember, and he could not. Gone, all real recollection, except that it had hurt him horribly. In this blankness he stood passing his handkerchief over hands and lips, which were very dry. By craning his head he could just see Fleur, standing with her back to that piano, still grinding out its tune, her arms tight crossed on her breast, a lighted cigarette between her lips, whose smoke half veiled her face. The expression on it was strange to Soames, The eyes shone and stared, and every feature was alive with a sort of wretched scorn and anger. Once or twice he had seen Annette look like that. The face was too vivid, too naked, not his daughter's at that moment. And he dared not go in, realizing the futility of any attempt at consolation. He sat down in the shadow of the ingle-nook. Monstrous trick that fate had paid him. Nemesis, that old unhappy marriage. And in God's name, why? How was he to know, when he wanted Irene so violently, and she consented to be his, that she would never love him? The tune died and was renewed and died again, and still Soames sat in the shadow, waiting for he knew not what. The fag of Fleur's cigarette, flung through the window, fell on the grass. He watched it glowing, burning itself out. The moon had freed herself above the poplars and poured her unreality on the garden. Comfortless light, mysterious, withdrawn, like the beauty of that woman who had never loved him, dappling the nemesias and the stocks with a vesture not of earth. Flowers, and his flower, so unhappy. Ah, why could not one put happiness into local loans, gilt its edges, insure it against going down? Light had ceased to flow out now from the drawing-room window. All was silent and dark in there. Had she gone up? He rose and, tiptoeing, peered in. It seemed so. He entered. The veranda kept the moonlight out, and at first he could see nothing but the outlines of furniture blacker than the darkness. He groped towards the farther window to shut it. His foot struck a chair, and he heard a gasp. There she was, curled and crushed into the corner of the sofa. His hand hovered. Did she want his consolation? He stood, gazing at that ball of crushed frills and hair and graceful youth, trying to burrow its way out of sorrow. How leave her there? And at last he touched her hair and said, "Come, darling, better go to bed. I'll make it up to you somehow." How fatuous! But what could he have said? End of section 32. Section 33 of the Forsyte Saga, Volume 3, To Let, by John Galsworthy. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Peter Dann. Under the Oak Tree. When their visitor had disappeared, John and his mother stood without speaking, till he said suddenly, "I ought to have seen him out." But Soames was already walking down the drive, and John went upstairs to his father's studio, not trusting himself to go back. The expression on his mother's face, confronting the man she had once been married to, had sealed a resolution growing within him ever since she left him the night before. It had put the finishing touch of reality. To marry Fleur would be to hit his mother in the face, to betray his dead father. It was no good. John had the least resentful of natures. He bore his parents no grudge in this hour of his distress. For one so young, there was a rather strange power in him of seeing things in some sort of proportion. It was worse for Fleur, worse for his mother even, than it was for him. Harder than to give up was to be given up, or to be the cause of someone you loved giving up for you. He must not, and would not, behave grudgingly. While he stood watching the tardy sunlight, he had again that sudden vision of the world which had come to him the night before. Sea on sea, country on country, millions on millions of people, all with their own lives, energies, joys, griefs and suffering, all with things they had to give up and separate struggles for existence. Even though he might be willing to give up all else for the one thing he couldn't have, he would be a fool to think his feeling mattered much in so vast a world, and to behave like a crying baby or a cad. He pictured the people who had nothing, the millions who had given up life in the war, the millions whom the war had left with life and little else, the hungry children he had read of, the shattered men, people in prison, every kind of unfortunate. And they did not help him much. If one had to miss a meal, what comfort in the knowledge that many others had to miss it too? There was more distraction in the thought of getting away out into this vast world of which he knew nothing yet. He could not go on staying here, walled in and sheltered, with everything so slick and comfortable, and nothing to do but brood and think what might have been. He could not go back to Wansdon and the memories of Fleur. If he saw her again, he could not trust himself, and if he stayed here or went back there, he would surely see her. While they were within reach of each other, that must happen. To go far away, and quickly, was the only thing to do. But however much he loved his mother, he did not want to go away with her. Then, feeling that was brutal, he made up his mind desperately to propose that they should go to Italy. For 2 hours in that melancholy room he tried to master himself, then dressed solemnly for dinner. His mother had done the same. They ate little, at some length, and talked of his father's catalogue. The show was arranged for October, and beyond clerical detail there was nothing more to do. After dinner she put on a cloak, and they went out, walked a little, talked a little, till they were standing silent at last beneath the oak tree. Ruled by the thought, if I show anything, I show all, John put his arm through hers and said quite casually, "Mother, let's go to Italy." Irene pressed his arm and said as casually, "It would be very nice, but I've been thinking you ought to see and do more than you would if I were with you." "But then you'd be alone." "I was once alone for more than 12 years. Besides, I should like to be here for the opening of Father's show." John's grip tightened around her arm. He was not deceived. "You couldn't stay here all by yourself. It's too big." "Not here, perhaps. In London. And I might go to Paris after the show opens. You ought to have a year at least, John, and see the world." "Yes, I'd like to see the world and rough it, but I don't want to leave you all alone." "My dear, I owe you that at least. If it's for your good, it'll be for mine. Why not start tomorrow? You've got your passport?" "Yes, if I'm going it had better be at once. Only, Mother, if I wanted to stay out somewhere, America or anywhere, would you mind coming presently?" "Wherever and whenever you send for me. But don't send until you really want me." John drew a deep breath. "I feel England's choky." They stood a few minutes longer under the oak tree, looking out to where the grandstand at Epsom was veiled in evening. The branches kept the moonlight from them, so that it only fell everywhere else, over the fields and far away, and on the windows of the creeped house behind, which soon would be to let. End of section 33. Section 34 of the Forsyte Saga, Volume 3, To Let, by John Galsworthy. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Peter Dann. Fleur's Wedding. The October paragraphs describing the wedding of Fleur Forsyte to Michael Mont hardly conveyed the symbolic significance of this event. In the union of the great-granddaughter of Superior Dorset with the heir of a 9th baronet was the outward and visible sign of that merger of class in class which buttresses the political stability of a realm. The time had come when the Forsytes might resign their natural resentments against a flummery not theirs by birth, and accept it as the still more natural due of their possessive instincts. Besides, they had to mount to make room for all those so much more newly rich. In that quiet but tasteful ceremony in Hanover Square, and afterward among the furniture in Green Street, it had been impossible for those not in the know to distinguish the Forsyte troop from the Mont contingent, so far away was Superior Dorset now. Was there, in the crease of his trousers, the expression of his moustache, his accent, or the shine of his top hat, a pin to choose between Soames and the 9th baronet himself? Was not Fleur as self-possessed, quick, glancing, pretty, and hard as the likeliest Muscombe, Mont, or Cherwell filly present? If anything, the Forsytes had it in dress and looks and manners. They had become upper class, and now their name would be formally recorded in the stud book, their money joined to land. Whether this was a little late in the day, and those rewards of the possessive instinct, lands and money, destined for the melting pot, was still a question so moot that it was not mooted. After all, Timothy had said consols were going up. Timothy, the last, the missing link. Timothy in extremis on the Bayswater Road, so Francie had reported. It was whispered, too, that this young Mont was a sort of socialist, strangely wise of him, and in the nature of insurance, considering the days they lived in. There was no uneasiness on that score. The landed classes produced that sort of amiable foolishness at times, turned to safe uses and confined to theory. As George remarked to his sister Francie, "They'll soon be having puppies. That'll give him pause." The church, with white flowers and something blue in the middle of the east window, looked extremely chaste, as though endeavouring to counteract the somewhat lurid phraseology of a service calculated to keep the thoughts of all on puppies. Forsytes, Haymans, Tweetymans sat in the left aisle, Monts, Charwells, Muscombes in the right, while a sprinkling of Fleur's fellow-sufferers at school and of Mont's fellow-sufferers in the war gaped indiscriminately from either side, and 3 maiden ladies, who had dropped in on their way from Skywards, brought up the rear, together with 2 Mont retainers and Fleur's old nurse. In the unsettled state of the country, as full a house as could be expected. Mrs. Val Darty, who sat with her husband in the 3rd row, squeezed his hand more than once during the performance. To her, who knew the plot of this tragi-comedy, its most dramatic moment was well-nigh painful. I wonder if John knows by instinct, she thought. John, out in British Columbia. She had received a letter from him only that morning which had made her smile and say, "John's in British Columbia, Val, because he wants to be in California. He thinks it's too nice there." "Oh," said Val, "so he's beginning to see a joke again." "He's bought some land and sent for his mother." "What on earth will she do out there?" "All she cares about is John. Do you still think it a happy release?" Val's shrewd eyes narrowed to grey pinpoints between their dark lashes. "Fleur wouldn't have suited him a bit. She's not bred right." "Poor little Fleur," sighed Holly. Ah, it was strange, this marriage. The young man, Mont, had caught her on the rebound, of course, in the reckless mood of one whose ship has just gone down. Such a plunge could not but be, as Val put it, an outside chance. There was little to be told from the back view of her young cousin's veil, and Holly's eyes reviewed the general aspect of this Christian wedding. She, who had made a love match which had been successful, had a horror of unhappy marriages. This might not be one in the end, but it was clearly a toss-up, and to consecrate a toss-up in this fashion with manufactured unction before a crowd of fashionable free-thinkers, for who thought otherwise than freely, or not at all when they were doled up, seemed to her as neat a sin as one could find in an age which had abolished them. Her eyes wandered from the prelate in his robes, a Charwell, the Forsytes had not as yet produced a prelate, to Val, beside her, thinking, she was certain, of the Mayfly filly at 15-1 for the Cambridgeshire. They passed on and caught the profile of the 9th Baronet, in counterfeitment of the kneeling process. She could just see the neat ruck above his knees where he had pulled his trousers up, and thought, "Val's forgotten to pull up his." Her eyes passed to the pew in front of her, where Winifred's substantial form was gowned with passion, and on again to Soames and Annette, kneeling side by side. A little smile came on her lips. Prosper Profond, back from the South Seas of the Channel, would be kneeling too, about 6 rows behind. Yes, this was a funny small business, however it turned out. Still, it was in a proper church, and would be in the proper papers tomorrow morning. They had begun a hymn. She could hear the 9th Baronet across the aisle singing of the hosts of Midian. Her little finger touched Val's thumb. They were holding the same hymn book, and a tiny thrill passed through her, preserved from 20 years ago. He stooped and whispered, "I say, do you remember the rat?" The rat at their wedding in Cape Colony, which had cleaned its whiskers behind the table at the registrar's, and between her little and 3rd fingers she squeezed his thumb hard. The hymn was over. The prelate had begun to deliver his discourse. He told them of the dangerous times they lived in, and the awful conduct of the House of Lords in connection with divorce. They were all soldiers, he said, in the trenches under the poisonous gas of the Prince of Darkness, and must be manful. The purpose of marriage was children, not mere sinful happiness. An imp danced in Holly's eyes. Val's eyelashes were meeting. Whatever happened, he must not snore. Her finger and thumb closed on his thigh till he stirred uneasily. The discourse was over, the danger past. They were signing in the vestry, and general relaxation had set in. A voice behind her said, "Will you stay the course?" "Who's that?" she whispered. "Old George Forsyte." Holly demurely scrutinized one of whom she had often heard. Fresh from South Africa and ignorant of her kith and kin, she never saw one without an almost childish curiosity. He was very big and very dapper. His eyes gave her a funny feeling of having no particular clothes. "They're off," she heard him say. They came, stepping from the chancel. Holly looked first in young Mont's face. His lips and ears were twitching. His eyes, shifting from his feet to the hand within his arm, stared suddenly before them as if to face a firing party. He gave Holly the feeling that he was spiritually intoxicated. But Fleur, that was different. The girl was perfectly composed, prettier than ever, in her white robes and veil over her banged dark chestnut hair. Her eyelids hovered demure over her dark hazel eyes. Outwardly she seemed all there, but inwardly, where was she? As those two passed, Fleur raised her eyelids. The restless glint of those clear whites remained on Holly's vision as might the flutter of caged birds' wings. In Green Street, Winifred stood to receive, just a little less composed than usual. Soames' request for the use of her house had come to her at a deeply psychological moment. Under the influence of a remark of Prosper Profond, she had begun to exchange her empire for expressionistic furniture. There were the most amusing arrangements, with violet, green, and orange blobs and scriggles to be had at Maillard's. Another month and the change would have been complete. Just now the very intriguing recruit she had enlisted did not march so well with the old guard. It was as if her regiment were half in khaki, half in scarlet and bearskins. But her strong and comfortable character made the best of it in a drawing-room which typified, perhaps more perfectly than she imagined, the semi-Bolshevized imperialism of her country. After all, this was a day of merger, and you couldn't have too much of it. Her eyes travelled indulgently among her guests. Soames had gripped the back of a Boule chair. Young Mont was behind that awfully amusing screen which no one as yet had been able to explain to her. The 9th Baronet had shied violently at a round scarlet table, inlaid under glass with blue Australian butterflies' wings, and was clinging to her Louis XV cabinet. Francie Forsyte had seized the new mantel-board, finely carved with little purple grotesques on an ebony ground. George, over by the old spinet, was holding a little sky-blue book, as if about to enter bets. Prosper Profond was twiddling the knobs of the open door, black with peacock-blue panels, and Annette's hands close by were grasping her own waist. Two Muscombes clung to the balcony among the plants, as if feeling ill. Lady Mont, thin and brave-looking, had taken up her long-handled glasses and was gazing at the central light shade of ivory and orange dashed with deep magenta, as if the heavens had opened. Everybody, in fact, seemed holding on to something. Only Fleur, still in her bridal dress, was detached from all support, flinging her words and glances to left and right. The room was full of the bubble and the squeak of conversation. Nobody could hear anything that anybody said, which seemed of little consequence, since no one waited for anything so slow as an answer. Modern conversation seemed to Winifred so different from the days of her prime, when a drawl was all the vogue. Still, it was amusing, which of course was all that mattered. Even the Forsytes were talking with extreme rapidity. Fleur and Christopher and Imogen and young Nicholas's youngest, Patrick. Soames, of course, was silent, but George, by the spinet, kept up a running commentary, and Francie by her mantel-shelf. Winifred drew nearer to the 9th Baronet. He seemed to promise a certain repose. His nose was fine and drooped a little, his grey moustaches too, and she said, drawling through her smile, "It's rather nice, isn't it?" His reply shot out of his smile like a snipped bread pellet. Do you remember in Fraser the tribe that buries the bride up to the waist?" He spoke as fast as anybody. He had dark, lively little eyes, too, all crinkled round like a Catholic priest's. Winifred felt suddenly he might say things she would regret. "They're always so amusing, weddings," she murmured, and moved on to Soames. He was curiously still, and Winifred saw at once what was dictating his immobility. To his right was George Forsyte, to his left Annette and Prosper Profond. He could not move without either seeing those two together or the reflection of them in George Forsyte's japing eyes. He was quite right not to be taking notice. "They say Timothy's sinking," he said glumly. "Where will you put him, Soames?" "Highgate." He counted on his fingers. "It'll make 12 of them there, including wives. How do you think Fleur looks?" "Remarkably well." Soames nodded. He had never seen her look prettier, yet he could not rid himself of the impression that this business was unnatural, remembering still that crushed figure burrowing into the corner of the sofa. From that night to this day he had received from her no confidences. He knew from his chauffeur that she had made one more attempt on Robin Hill and drawn blank, an empty house, no one at home. He knew that she had received a letter, but not what was in it, except that it had made her hide herself and cry. He had remarked that she looked at him sometimes when she thought he wasn't noticing, as if she were wondering still what he had done, forsooth, to make those people hate him so. Well, there it was. Annette had come back, and things had worn on through the summer, very miserable, till suddenly Fleur had said she was going to marry young Mont. She had shown him a little more affection when she told him that, and he had yielded. What was the good of opposing it? God knew that he had never wished to thwart her in anything, and the young man seemed quite delirious about her. No doubt she was in a reckless mood, and she was young, absurdly young, but if he opposed her, he didn't know what she would do. For all he could tell, she might want to take up a profession, become a doctor or solicitor, some nonsense. She had no aptitude for painting, writing, music, in his view the legitimate occupations of unmarried women, if they must do something in these days. On the whole, she was safer married, for he could see too well how feverish and restless she was at home. Annette, too, had been in favour of it. Annette, from behind the veil of his refusal to know what she was about, if she was about anything. Annette had said, "Let her marry this young man. He's a nice boy, not so highty-flighty as he seems." Where she got her expressions he didn't know, but her opinion soothed his doubts. His wife, whatever her conduct, had clear eyes and an almost oppressing amount of common sense. He had settled 50,000 on Fleur, taking care that there was no cross-settlement in case it didn't turn out well. Could it turn out well? She had not got over that other boy, he knew. They were to go to Spain for the honeymoon. He would be even lonelier when she was gone. But later, perhaps, she would forget and turn to him again. Winifred's voice broke on his reverie. "Why, of all wonders, June!" There, in a jibber, what things she wore, with her hair straying from under a fillet, Soames saw his cousin and Fleur going forward to greet her. The two passed from their view out onto the stairway. "Really," said Winifred, "she does the most impossible things. Fancy her coming." "What made you ask her?" muttered Soames. "Because I thought she wouldn't accept, of course." Winifred had forgotten that behind conduct lies the main trend of character, or, in other words, omitted to remember that Fleur was now a lame duck. On receiving her invitation, June had first thought, "I wouldn't go near them for the world," and then one morning had awakened from a dream of Fleur waving to her from a boat with a wild, unhappy gesture, and she had changed her mind. When Fleur came forward and said to her, "Do come up while I'm changing my dress," she had followed up the stairs. The girl led the way into Imogen's old bedroom, set ready for her toilet. June sat down on the bed, thin and upright, like a little spirit in the sere and yellow. Fleur locked the door. The girl stood before her, divested of her wedding dress. What a pretty thing she was. "I suppose you think me a fool," she said, with quivering lips, "when it was to have been John. But what does it matter? Michael wants me, and I don't care. It'll get me away from home." Diving her hand into the frills on her breast, she brought out a letter. "John wrote me this." June read, "Lake Okanagan, British Columbia. I'm not coming back to England. Bless you always, John." "She's made safe, you see," said Fleur. June handed back the letter. "That's not fair to Irene," she said. "She always told John he could do as he wished." Fleur smiled bitterly. "Tell me, didn't she spoil your life too?" June looked up. "Nobody can spoil a life, my dear. That's nonsense. Things happen, but we bob up." With a sort of terror she saw the girl sink on her knees and bury her face in the gibber. A strangled sob mounted to June's ears. It's all right, she murmured. "Don't. There. But the point of the girl's chin was pressed ever closer into her thigh, and the sound was dreadful of her sobbing. Well, it had to come. She would feel better afterward. June stroked the short hair of that shapely head, and all the scattered mother sense in her focused itself and passed through the tips of her fingers into the girl's brain. "Don't sit down under it, my dear," she said at last. "We can't control life, but we can fight it, make the best of things. I've had to. I held on like you, and I cried as you're crying now, and look at me." Fleur raised her head. A sob merged suddenly into a little choked laugh. In truth, it was the thin and rather wild and wasted spirit she was looking at, but it had brave eyes. "All right," she said. "I'm sorry. I shall forget him, I suppose, if I fly fast and far enough." And scrambling to her feet, she went over to the washstand. June watched her removing with cold water the traces of emotion. Save for a little becoming pinkness, there was nothing left when she stood before the mirror. June got off the bed and took a pincushion in her hand. To put 2 pins into the wrong places was all the vent she found for sympathy. "Give me a kiss," she said when Fleur was ready, and dug her chin into the girl's warm cheek. "I want a whiff," said Fleur. "Don't wait." June left her, sitting on the bed with a cigarette between her lips and her eyes half closed, and went downstairs. In the doorway of the drawing-room stood Soames, as if unquiet at his daughter's tardiness. June tossed her head and passed down onto the half-landing. Her cousin Francie was standing there. "Look," said June, pointing with her chin at Soames. "That man's fatal." "How do you mean?" said Francie. "Fatal?" June did not answer her. "I shan't wait to see them off," she said. "Goodbye." "Goodbye," said Francie, and her eyes, of a Celtic grey, goggled. That old feud. Really, it was quite romantic. Soames, moving to the well of the staircase, saw June go and drew a breath of satisfaction. Why didn't Fleur come? They would miss their train. That train would bear her away from him, yet he could not help fidgeting at the thought that they would lose it. And then she did come, running down in her tan-coloured frock and black velvet cap, and passed him into the drawing-room. He saw her kiss her mother, her aunt, Val's wife, Imogen, and then come forth, quick and pretty as ever. How would she treat him at this last moment of her girlhood? He couldn't hope for much. Her lips pressed the middle of his cheek. "Daddy," she said, and was past and gone. Daddy. She hadn't called him that for years. He drew a long breath and followed slowly down. There was all the folly with that confetti stuff and the rest of it to go through with yet, but he would like just to catch her smile as she leant out, though they would hit her in the eye with the shoe if they didn't take care. Young Mont's voice said fervently in his ear, "Goodbye, sir, and thank you. I'm so fearfully bucked." "Goodbye," he said. "Don't miss your train." He stood on the bottom step but 3, whence he could see above the heads, the silly hats and heads. They were in the car now, and there was that stuff showering, and there went the shoe. A flood of something welled up in Soames, and he didn't know. He couldn't see. End of section 34. Section 35 of the Forsyte Saga, Volume 3, To Let, by John Galsworthy. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Peter Dann. The last of the old Forsytes. When they came to prepare that terrific symbol Timothy Forsyte, the one pure individualist left, the only man who hadn't heard of the Great War, they found him wonderful. Not even death had undermined his soundness. To Smither and Cook that preparation came like final evidence of what they had never believed possible, the end of the old Forsyte family on earth. Poor Mr. Timothy must now take a harp and sing in the company of Miss Forsyte, Mrs. Julia, Miss Hester, with Mr. Jolyon, Mr. Swithin, Mr. James, Mr. Roger, and Mr. Nicholas of the party. Whether Mrs. Hayman would be there was more doubtful, seeing that she had been cremated. Secretly, Cook thought that Mr. Timothy would be upset. He had always been so set against barrel organs. How many times had she not said, "Drat the thing, there it is again. Smithy, you'd better run up and see what you can do." And in her heart she would so have enjoyed the tunes if she hadn't known that Mr. Timothy would ring the bell in a minute and say, "Here, take him a halfpenny and tell him to move on." Often they had been obliged to add threepence of their own before the man would go. Timothy had ever underrated the value of emotion. Luckily he had taken the organs for blue bottles in his last years, which had been a comfort, and they had been able to enjoy the tunes. But a harp! Cook wondered. It was a change. And Mr. Timothy had never liked change. But she did not speak of this to Smither, who did so take a line of her own in regards to heaven that would quite put one about sometimes. She cried while Timothy was being prepared, and they all had sherry afterwards out of the yearly Christmas bottle, which would not be needed now. Ah, dear, she had been there 45 years, and Smither 43, and now they would be going to a tiny house in Tooting to live on their savings and what Miss Hester had so kindly left them, for to take fresh service after the glorious past. No. But they would like just to see Mr. Soames again, and Mrs. Darty, and Miss Francie, and Miss Euphemia. And even if they had to take their own cab, they felt they must go to the funeral. For 6 years Mr. Timothy had been their baby, getting younger and younger every day, till at last he had been too young to live. They spent the regulation hours of waiting in polishing and dusting, in catching the one mouse left and asphyxiating the last beetle so as to leave it nice, discussing with each other what they would buy at the sale. Miss Ann's workbox, Miss Julie's, that is, Mrs. Julia's, seaweed album, the fire screen Miss Hester had crewelled, and Mr. Timothy's hair, little golden curls glued into a black frame. Oh, they must have those, only the price of things had gone up so. It fell to Soames to issue invitations for the funeral. He had them drawn up by Gradman in his office, only blood relations and no flowers. 6 carriages were ordered. The will would be read afterward at the house. He arrived at 11 o'clock to see that all was ready. At 1:15 old Gradman came in black gloves and crape on his hat. He and Soames stood in the drawing-room waiting. At 11:30 the carriages drew up in a long row, but no one else appeared. Gradman said, "It surprises me, Mr. Soames. I posted them myself." "I don't know," said Soames. "He lost touch with the family." Soames had often noticed in old days how much more neighbourly his family were to the dead than to the living, but now the way they had flocked to Fleur's wedding and abstained from Timothy's funeral seemed to show some vital change. There might, of course, be another reason, for Soames felt that if he had not known the contents of Timothy's will, he might have stayed away himself through delicacy. Timothy had left a lot of money, with nobody in particular to leave it to. They mightn't like to seem to expect something. At 12 o'clock the procession left the door, Timothy alone in the first carriage under glass. Then Soames alone, then Gradman alone, then Cook and Smither together. They started at a walk, but were soon trotting under a bright sky. At the entrance to Highgate Cemetery they were delayed by service in the chapel. Soames would have liked to stay outside in the sunshine. He didn't believe a word of it. On the other hand, it was a form of insurance which could not safely be neglected in case there might be something in it after all. They walked up 2 and 2. he and Gradman, cook and smither, to the family vault. It was not very distinguished for the funeral of the last old Forsyte. He took Gradman into his carriage on the way back to the Bayswater Road with a certain glow in his heart. He had a surprise in pickle for the old chap who had served the Forsytes 54 years, a treat that was entirely his doing. How well he remembered saying to Timothy the day after Aunt Hester's funeral, "Well, Uncle Timothy, there's Gradman. He's taken a lot of trouble for the family. What do you say to leaving him 5,000? And his surprise, seeing the difficulty there had been in getting Timothy to leave anything when Timothy had nodded. And now the old chap would be as pleased as Punch, for Mrs. Gradman, he knew, had a weak heart, and their son had lost a leg in the war. It was extraordinarily gratifying to Soames to have left him £5,000 of Timothy's money. They sat down together in the little drawing-room, whose walls, like a vision of heaven, were sky-blue and gold, with every picture frame unnaturally bright, and every speck of dust removed from every piece of furniture, to read that little masterpiece, The Will of Timothy. With his back to the light in Aunt Hester's chair, Soames faced Gradman with his face to the light on Aunt Anne's sofa, and, crossing his legs, began. "This is the last will and testament of me, Timothy Forsyte, of the Bower, Bayswater Road, London. I appoint my nephew, Soames Forsyte, of the Shelter, Maple, Durham, and Thomas Gradman, of 159 Folly Road, Highgate, hereinafter called my trustees, to be the trustees and executors of this my will. To the said Soames Forsyte I leave the sum of £1,000, free of legacy duty, and to the said Thomas Gradman I leave the sum of £5,000, free of legacy duty." Soames paused. Old Gradman was leaning forward, convulsively gripping a stout black knee with each of his thick hands. His mouth had fallen open, so that the gold fillings of 3 teeth gleamed. His eyes were blinking. 2 tears rolled slowly out of them. Soames read hastily on. "All the rest of my property, of whatsoever description, I bequeath to my trustees upon trust, to convert and hold the sum upon the following trusts, namely, to pay thereout all my debts, funeral expenses, and outgoings of any kind in connection with my will, and to hold the residue thereof in trust for that male lineal descendant of my father Jolyon Forsyte, by his marriage with Anne Pierce, who, after the decease of all lineal descendants, whether male or female, of my said father, by his said marriage, in being at the time of my death, shall last attain the age of 21 years absolutely, it being my desire that my property shall be nursed to the extreme limit permitted by the laws of England for the benefit of such male lineal descendant as aforesaid." Soames read the investment and attestation clauses, and, ceasing, looked at Gradman. The old fellow was wiping his brow with a large handkerchief, whose brilliant colour supplied a sudden festive tinge to the proceedings. "My word, Mr. Soames," he said, and it was clear that the lawyer in him had utterly wiped out the man. "My word, why, there are 2 babies now, and some quite young children. If one of them lives to be 80, it's not a great age, and add 21, that's 100 years, and Mr. Timothy's worth £150,000 net if he's worth a penny. Compound interest at 5% doubles you in 14 years. In 14 years, 300,000, 600,000 in 28, 1,200,000 in 42, 2,400,000 in 56, 4,800,000 in 70, 9,600,000 in 84. Why, in 100 years it'll be 20 million, and we shan't live to use it. It is a will." Soames said dryly, "Anything may happen. The state might take the lot. They're capable of anything in these days." "And carry 5, said Gradman to himself. "I forgot. Mr. Timothy's in consols. We shan't get more than 2% with his income tax. To be on the safe side, say 8 million. Still, that's a pretty penny." Soames rose and handed him the will. "You're going into the city. Take care of that and do what's necessary. Advertise, but there are no debts. When's the sale?" "Tuesday week," said Gradman. "Life or lives in Bean, and 21 years afterward. It's a long way off, but I'm glad he's left it in the family." The sale, not at Jobson's in view of the Victorian nature of the effect, was far more freely attended than the funeral, though not by Cook and Smither, for Soames had taken it on himself to give them their heart's desires. Winifred was present, Euphemia and Francie, and Eustace had come in his car. The miniatures, Barbizons, and J.R. drawings had been bought in by Soames, and relics of no marketable value were set aside in an off-room for members of the family who cared to have mementos. These were the only restrictions upon bidding, characterized by an almost tragic languor. Not one piece of furniture, no picture or porcelain figure appealed to modern taste. The hummingbirds had fallen like autumn leaves when taken from where they had not hummed for 60 years. It was painful to Soames to see the chairs his aunts had sat on, the little grand piano they had practically never played, the books whose outsides they had gazed at, the china they had dusted, the curtains they had drawn, the hearthrug which had warmed their feet, above all the beds they had lain and died in, sold to little dealers and the housewives of Fulham. And yet, what could one do? Buy them and stick them in a lumber room? No, they had to go the way of all flesh and furniture and be worn out. But when they put up Aunt Anne's sofa and were going to knock it down for 30 shillings, he cried out suddenly, £5! The sensation was considerable, and the sofa his. When that little sale was over in the fusty sale-room, and those Victorian ashes scattered, he went out into the misty October sunshine, feeling as if cosiness had died out of the world, and the board "To Let" was up indeed. Revolutions on the horizon, Fleur in Spain, no comfort in Annette, no Timothy's on the Bayswater Road. In the irritable desolation of his soul he went into the Grosvenor Gallery. That chap Jolyon's watercolours were on view there. He went in to look down his nose at them. It might give him some faint satisfaction. The news had trickled through from June to Val's wife, from her to Val, from Val to his mother, from her to Soames, that the house, the fatal house at Robin Hill, was for sale, and Irene going to join her boy out in British Columbia or some such place. For one wild moment the thought had come to Soames, why shouldn't I buy it back? I meant it for my... No sooner come than gone. Too lugubrious a triumph, with too many humiliating memories for himself and Fleur. She would never live there after what had happened. No, the place must go its way to some peer or profiteer. It had been a bone of contention from the first, the shell of the feud, and with the woman gone it was an empty shell. For sale or to let. With his mind's eye he could see that board raised high above the ivied wall which he had built. He passed through the first of the 2 rooms in the gallery. There was certainly a body of work, and now that the fellow was dead it did not seem so trivial. The drawings were pleasing enough, with quite a sense of atmosphere, and something individual in the brushwork. His father and my father, he and I, his child and mine, thought Soames. So it had gone on, and all about that woman. Softened by the events of the past week, affected by the melancholy beauty of the autumn day, Soames came nearer than he had ever been to realization of that truth, passing the understanding of a Forsyte pure, that the body of beauty has a spiritual essence, uncapturable save by a devotion which thinks not of self. After all, he was near that truth in his devotion to his daughter. Perhaps that made him understand a little how he had missed the prize. And there, among the drawings of his kinsman, who had attained to that which he had found beyond his reach, he thought of him and her with a tolerance which surprised him. But he did not buy a drawing. Just as he passed the seat of custom on his return to the outer air, he met with a contingency which had not been entirely absent from his mind when he went into the gallery, Irene herself coming in. So she had not gone yet, and was still paying farewell visits to that fellow's remains. He subdued the little involuntary leap of his subconsciousness, the mechanical reaction of his senses to the charm of this once-owned woman, and passed her with averted eyes. But when he had gone by, he could not for the life of him help looking back. This, then, was finality, the heat and stress of his life, the madness and the longing thereof, the only defeat he had known, would be over when she faded from his view this time. Even such memories had their own queer, aching value. She too was looking back. Suddenly she lifted her gloved hand. Her lips smiled faintly. Her dark eyes seemed to speak. It was the turn of Soames to make no answer to that smile and that little farewell wave. He went out into the fashionable street, quivering from head to foot. He knew what she had meant to say. "Now that I am going for ever out of the reach of you and yours, forgive me. I wish you well." That was the meaning, last sign of that terrible reality, passing morality, duty, common sense, her aversion from him who had owned her body but had never touched her spirit or her heart. It hurt, yes, more than if she had kept her mask unmoved, her hand unlifted. 3 days later, in that fast yellowing October, Soames took a taxicab to Highgate Cemetery and mounted through its white forest to the Forsyte vault. Close to the cedar, above catacombs and columbaria, tall, ugly, and individual, it looked like an apex of the competitive system. He could remember a discussion wherein Swithin had advocated the addition to its face of the pheasant proper. The proposal had been rejected in favour of a wreath in stone above the stark words, "The family vault of Jolyon Forsyte, 1850. It was in good order. All trace of the recent interment had been removed, and its sober grey gloomed reposefully in the sunshine. The whole family lay there now, except old Jolyon's wife, who had gone back under a contract to her own family vault in Suffolk. Old Jolyon himself lying at Robin Hill, and Susan Hayman cremated so that no one knew where she might be. Soames gazed at it with satisfaction. Massive, needing little attention, and this was important, for he was well aware that no one would attend to it when he himself was gone, and he would have to be looking out for lodging soon. He might have 20 years before him, but one never knew. 20 years without an aunt or uncle, with a wife of whom one had better not know anything, with a daughter gone from home. His mood inclined to melancholy and retrospection. This cemetery was full, they said, of people with extraordinary names, buried in extraordinary taste. Still, they had a fine view up here, right over London. Annette had once given him a story to read by that Frenchman Maupassant, most lugubrious concern, where all the skeletons emerged from their graves one night, and all the pious inscriptions on the stones were altered to descriptions of their sins. Not a true story at all. He didn't know about the French, but there was not much real harm in English people except their teeth and their taste, which was certainly deplorable. The family vault of Jolyon Forsyte, 1850. A lot of people had been buried here since then. A lot of English life crumbled to mould and dust. The boom of an airplane passing under the gold-tinted clouds caused him to lift his eyes. The deuce of a lot of expansion had gone on, but it all came back to a cemetery, to a name and a date on a tomb. And he thought with a curious pride that he and his family had done little or nothing to help this feverish expansion. Good solid middle men, they had gone to work with dignity to manage and possess. Superior Dorset, indeed, had built in a dreadful, and Jolyon painted in a doubtful period, but so far as he remembered, not another of them all had soiled his hands by creating anything, unless you counted Valdarti and his horse-breeding. Collectors, solicitors, barristers, merchants, publishers, accountants, directors, land agents, even soldiers, there they had been. The country had expanded, as it were, in spite of them. They had checked, controlled, defended, and taken advantage of the process, and when you considered how Superior Dorset had begun life with next to nothing, and his lineal descendants already owned what old Gradman estimated at between 1 million and 1.5 million, it was not so bad. And yet he sometimes felt as if the family bolt was shot, their possessive instinct dying out. They seemed unable to make money, this fourth generation. They were going into art, literature, farming, or the army, or just living on what was left them. They had no push and no tenacity. They would die out if they didn't take care. Soames turned from the vault and faced towards the breeze. The air up here would be delicious if only he could rid his nerves of the feeling that mortality was in it. He gazed restlessly at the crosses and the urns, the angels, the immortelles, the flowers, gaudy or withering, and suddenly he noticed a spot which seemed so different from anything else up there that he was obliged to walk the few necessary yards and look at it. A sober corner with a massive queer-shaped cross of grey, rough-hewn granite guarded by 4 dark yew trees. The spot was free from the pressure of the other graves, having a little box-hedged garden on the far side, and in front a goldening birch tree. This oasis in the desert of conventional graves appealed to the aesthetic sense of Soames, and he sat down there in the sunshine. Through those trembling gold birch leaves he gazed out at London and yielded to the waves of memory. He thought of Irene in Montpellier Square, when her hair was rusty golden and her white shoulders his, Irene, the prize of his love-passion, resistant to his ownership. He saw Bosny's body lying in that white mortuary, and Irene sitting on the sofa looking at space with the eyes of a dying bird. Again he thought of her by the little green Niobe in the Bois de Boulogne, once more rejecting him. His fancy took him on beside his drifting river on the November day when Fleur was to be born, took him to the dead leaves floating on the green-tinged water and the snake-headed weed forever swaying and nosing, sinuous, blind, tethered, and on again to the window opened to the cold starry night above Hyde Park, with his father lying dead. His fancy darted to that picture of the future town, to that boy's and Fleur's first meeting, to the bluish trail of Prosper Profond's cigar, and Fleur in the window, pointing down to where the fellow prowled, to the sight of Irene and that dead fellow sitting side by side in the stand at Lord's, to her and that boy at Robin Hill, to the sofa where Fleur lay crushed up in the corner, to her lips pressed into his cheek and her farewell, Daddy. And suddenly he saw again Irene's grey-gloved hand waving its last gesture of release. He sat there a long time, dreaming his career, faithful to the scut of his possessive instinct, warming himself even with its failures. To let the Forsyte age and way of life, when a man owned his soul, his investments, and his woman without check or question. And now the state had, or would have, his investment, his woman had herself, and God knew who had his soul. To let, that sane and simple creed. The waters of change were foaming in, carrying the promise of new forms only when their destructive flood should have passed its full. He sat there, subconscious of them, but with his thoughts resolutely set on the past, as a man might ride into a wild night with his face to the tail of his galloping horse. Athwart the Victorian dykes the waters were rolling on property, manners and morals, on melody and the old forms of art, waters bringing to his mouth a salt taste as of blood, lapping to the foot of this Highgate Hill where Victorianism lay buried. And sitting there, high up in its most individual spot, Soames, like a figure of investment, refused their restless sounds. Instinctively he would not fight them. There was in him too much primeval wisdom of man, the possessive animal. They would quiet down when they had fulfilled their tidal fever of dispossessing and destroying, when the creations and the properties of others were sufficiently broken and defected. They would lapse and ebb, and fresh forms would rise, based on an instinct older than the fever of change, the instinct of home. "Je m'en fiche," said Prosper Profond. Soames did not say "Je m'en fiche." It was French, and the fellow was a thorn in his side, but deep down he knew that change was only the interval of death between two forms of life, destruction necessary to make room for fresher property. What though the board was up and coziness to let? Someone would come along and take it again some day. And only one thing really troubled him, sitting there, the melancholy craving in his heart, because the sun was like enchantment on his face and on the clouds and on the golden birch leaves, and the wind's rustle was so gentle, and the yew tree green so dark, and the sickle of a moon pale in the sky. He might wish and never get it, the beauty and the loving in the world. End of section 35. End of the Forsyte Saga, Volume 3, To Let, by John Galsworthy.